the Duchess of Marenford, knew her marriage had ended when her husband lifted his glass to another woman, and the whole dinner table understood before he did. Until that moment, Honoria Devereux had believed there were humiliations a woman could survive if she kept her shoulders level and her voice gentle. She had survived 5 years of being consulted about linen but not loneliness, praised for proper seating but not companionship, summoned when a tenant needed soothing but forgotten when music began after dinner. She had become excellent at the art of being useful without being cherished. At Marenford House in Mayfair, usefulness had the polish of silver, the scent of beeswax, and the sound of servants pausing outside doors to hear whether the Duchess required anything more. That evening, she had required nothing for herself. She had spent 3 hours saving a dinner no one would know had nearly collapsed. The seating cards had been altered before the first carriage arrived, placing Lord Radbourne beside the man who had accused his son of cowardice in Parliament. The fish course had threatened disaster when the sauce split in the kitchen. A footman had nearly carried the wrong decanter to Lady Augusta Fenwick, whose digestion was famous across half of London for punishing anyone careless enough to offer her port too early. Honoria had corrected the cards with her own hand, soothed the cook, changed the service order, and sent a quiet message to the butler that Lady Augusta must have claret and flattery in equal measure. By 9 o'clock, the candles burned steadily. The gilt mirrors doubled the glow, and every guest believed the Duke of Marenford's household ran with effortless grace. Effortless. Honoria had learned that word was often used by those who had never lifted the weight. She sat at the lower curve of the long dining table, opposite Tristan, Duke of Marenford, because rank and marriage placed them in symmetry, even when life had placed them nowhere near each other. He looked magnificent beneath the candlelight, dark hair brushed back, evening coat cut with severe perfection, one hand resting beside his glass as though the room had been built to obey it. People called him cold. Honoria had once defended him, softly, foolishly, saying that reserve was not the same as cruelty. She still believed that. Cruelty required attention. Tristan's failure had always been more quiet. He did not wound like a man aiming a blade. He wounded like a man who did not notice where he stepped. At his right sat Cecily, Countess of Morvale, in silver-grey silk that caught the light whenever she inclined her head. Lady Morvale had the sort of beauty that never hurried. She spoke softly enough to make men lean closer and smiled as though every kindness cost her something exquisite. Years ago, before Honoria had become Duchess of Marenford, society had expected Tristan to marry Cecily. Some still behaved as though a clerical error had placed Honoria in the title instead. Lady Augusta certainly did. Tristan's aunt sat halfway down the table, narrow as a judgment in black satin, watching Honoria with the mild distaste one, reserved for a servant who had done everything, correctly but still breathed too audibly. "My dear Cecily," Lady Augusta said, raising her voice just enough to travel, "I do not know how you do it. The room seems calmer whenever you are in it." Cecily lowered her lashes. "You flatter me, Lady Augusta." "Not at all. Some women are born with social instinct. Others must study it like a foreign language." A small smile moved around the table, not large enough to accuse, not kind enough to ignore. Honoria reached for her water glass and discovered her hand was perfectly steady. That was something, at least. Across the table, Tristan turned his head slightly toward his aunt. For one brief second, Honoria thought he might correct her. He had heard, of course he had heard, the Duke of Marenford missed very little in Parliament, in business, in estate matters, or in the movement of money. He could detect a false clause in a lease after one reading. He could hear hesitation in a steward's voice from across a room. Surely he could hear a woman being diminished at his own table, but Lady Morvale leaned toward him then and murmured something about the successful arrangement of guests, and Tristan's attention shifted. Honoria saw the exact moment. It was small, it was nothing, it was the whole marriage. The final course arrived without incident. Ices in little glass dishes, pears poached in wine, almond cakes dusted with sugar. The guests relaxed into the comfortable glow that followed a dinner rescued so thoroughly that no one knew it had required rescue. Mr. Vale, the butler, passed behind Honoria with the silent gravity of a priest. His eyes flicked once to the little ring of keys at her waist, then away. Those keys were not the housekeeper's heavy ring, not the iron burden of pantries and coal rooms. They were the Duchess's own mistress's keys, small and polished, kept on a narrow chain of darkened silver. One opened her writing desk. One opened the cabinet, where household accounts were kept before they went to Tristan's steward. One opened the charity strongbox for the Alderwick widows. One opened the drawer that held the silver inventory book. One opened the linen reserve used only when guests of consequence filled Marenford House. They had been given to her the week after her wedding, not with tenderness, but with expectation. Here they had said without words, "Be useful." She had been. Tristan rose. The table quieted at once. Power did that for him. It gathered silence before he had earned it. Honoria looked up surprised. There had been no planned toast beyond the loyal one at the beginning of dinner. Lady Augusta's mouth curved with satisfaction. Lady Morvale looked down at her glass as though modesty had taken her prisoner. Tristan lifted his wine. His eyes moved over the table, past Honoria, then returned to Cecily. "I would be remiss," he said, his voice deep and composed, "if I allowed this evening to close without acknowledging a lady whose presence has brought ease to a difficult season." Honoria felt the first small tear inside herself, not in her eyes, but somewhere lower, somewhere no one could see. Tristan continued, "To Lady Morvale, whose grace has long been a blessing to this house." The silence after his words was not admiration, it was recognition. Lord Radbourne looked into his glass. Lady Augusta smiled openly now. Cecily lifted her face with perfect hesitation, as if the honour had startled her. At the far end of the table, a young baroness glanced at Honoria and then away. Too quickly. That glance hurt more than the toast. Pity was an intimate insult when offered in public. Honoria could have corrected him. She could have said that Lady Morvale had not touched a seating card, had not saved the sauce, had not noticed the missing page in the silver book that morning, had not remembered Lady Radbourne could not bear almond. She could have laughed lightly and reclaimed the room. She could have wept, which would have pleased those who thought her unequal to the title. Instead, she looked at her husband. For a moment, Tristan looked back. Something uncertain crossed his face, swift as a shadow over glass. Perhaps he finally saw that she had not raised her glass. Perhaps he noticed that her plate was untouched. Perhaps he merely wondered why the room had become so still. Cecily spoke first. "Your Grace, you're too generous." Her voice trembled in exactly the right place. Tristan inclined his head. "Not at all. Not at all." The words settled gently over years of absence. Honoria folded her napkin once, then again. The movement was small, domestic, and final. The footman behind her chair stepped forward. but she had already risen. Every eye turned toward her. She did not look at Lady Augusta. She did not look at Lady Morvale. She looked only at Tristan, because dignity did not require an audience, but truth sometimes deserved a witness. "I find myself fatigued," she said. Her voice was calm enough to shame the room. "Please forgive my early retirement." Tristan's brows drew together. Honoria. It was the first time he had said her name all evening. She almost smiled at the cruelty of that timing. "There's no need for concern," she answered, because he had used a contraction in private once, years ago, when he was less guarded, and she had remembered it like a fool. "I am quite able to see myself out." She heard Lady Augusta inhale. She heard Cecily's soft rustle of silk. She heard the candles hiss faintly above the table. Then Honoria unfastened the narrow chain at her waist. The mistress's key ring lay against her palm, warm from her body. Each small key, marked by years of use, no one had praised. She placed it on the silver salver beside her untouched wine-glass. The sound was delicate. It carried through the room like a verdict. Mr. Vale's face changed for half a second. Only half. It was enough to tell her he understood. Tristan looked from the keys to her face. His expression sharpened. "What are you doing?" he asked. Honoria gave him the small, perfect curtsy she had been trained to offer, before queens, bishops, and husbands who had mistaken patience for permanence, leaving what is no longer mine to keep. No one moved. That was her mercy, that they would remember the silence. She turned and walked from the dining room with measured steps, past the portraits of Devereux men who had ruled estates, married heiresses, and expected women to preserve their houses without troubling their pride. In the hall, her maid, Ellis, appeared as if she had been waiting for the sound of a heart breaking politely. Honoria drew on her gloves. "My carriage," she said, "and my grey cloak." Ellis's eyes shone, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, Your Grace." Behind Honoria, the dining room remained silent. No chair scraped, no husband followed. That, too, was an answer. Outside, the Mayfair night was cold enough to make her breath visible. Gaslight blurred along the pavement. The carriage door opened. Honoria stepped inside without looking, back at the windows of Marenford House, where she had spent 5 years becoming indispensable to a man who had just thanked someone else for the life she had maintained. Only when the carriage began to move did she press her gloved hand against her waist, where the keys had always rested. The absence felt strange, lighter than she expected. Inside the dining room, long after the wheels had turned the corner, Tristan Devereux stood over a silver salver and stared at the small ring of keys his wife had left behind. They looked harmless beneath the candlelight. They looked like household things. Then he touched them and found them cold. For several seconds, Tristan Devereux did not understand that the small ring of keys on the silver was not a gesture. It was an abdication. The dining room had emptied with the unnatural speed of people escaping a fire they were too well bred to name. Lord Radbourne had bowed with excessive gravity. The young Baroness had refused to meet Tristan's eyes. Lady Augusta had attempted a laugh and failed when no one joined her. Lady Morvale had touched his sleeve with soft concern, murmuring that Honoria had always possessed a delicate sensibility. But Tristan had barely heard her. He stood beneath the chandelier, one hand resting on the table, staring at the keys his wife had worn every day of their marriage, as if they had only now become visible. They were small, polished by use, each one tagged in Honoria's neat hand. Writing desk, accounts cabinet, Alderwick relief, silver book, linen reserve. He knew the words. He did not know the work behind them. That realization irritated him before it frightened him, because Tristan had spent his life believing ignorance was a choice other men made. He was thorough, exact, difficult to deceive. He knew the yield of the Northfields at Alderwick Hall, the terms of 3 separate leases in Derbyshire, the names of men in Parliament who smiled before betraying a vote, and the difference between loyalty and convenience in every steward he employed. Yet he could not remember the last time he had asked his wife whether the keys at her waist were heavy. Mr. Vale remained by the sideboard, his face composed into the tragic neutrality of a well-trained butler. Mrs. Ellery, the housekeeper, stood near the door with her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the carpet. Tristan closed his fingers around the keys. They were colder than he expected. "Mr. Vale," he said. The butler stepped forward. "Your Grace." How long had her Grace intended to leave? A pause. Too short to be insolence. Too long to be ignorance. "I couldn't say, Your Grace." Tristan looked at him. In most men, that tone would have been evasion. In Mr. Vale, it was loyalty under restraint. Could not or would not. "I don't know her Grace's private thoughts, sir." "That was not my question." Mrs. Ellery's fingers tightened once, then stilled. Tristan saw it. He had trained himself to notice hands. Hands lied less than faces. He turned to her. "Mrs. Ellery." "Your Grace." Her voice was steady, but the words were guarded. "Did the Duchess speak of leaving Marenford House?" "No, Your Grace." "Did she give orders for a trunk?" "Only a small valise, sir. Her maid prepared it after dinner." "After dinner. Not before." Something in Tristan's chest shifted, not pain exactly, but pressure. Honoria had not planned a performance. She had reached the end of something at his table, and acted before dignity could be talked out of her. "Who altered the seating cards tonight?" he asked. The question struck the servants like a dropped glass. Mr. Vale glanced toward Mrs. Ellery. Mrs. Ellery looked down. Tristan's voice lowered. "I asked who altered them." "Her Grace corrected them," Mrs. Ellery said at last. "Corrected," Tristan repeated. "Not arranged?" "No, Your Grace. They were found changed before the first guests came down." Lord Radbourne had been placed beside Sir Emmet Pike. Tristan knew enough of that quarrel to feel the first clean edge of alarm. Who found the error? Her Grace. And the fish course? Mr. Vale drew a slow breath. The sauce broke in the kitchen. Her Grace sent instructions for the lemon cream to be served instead, and had the cook keep the first sauce from leaving the kitchen. The chandelier hissed softly above them. Tristan could still hear his own toast in the space where Honoria should have been breathing. "And Lady Morvale?" he asked. What did Lady Morvale do to steady the evening? Neither servant answered. That silence did not merely trouble him, it accused him. Tristan placed the keys back on the salver because his hand had begun to close too tightly around them. No member of this household is to repeat what occurred tonight below stairs or beyond these walls. No guest is to receive confirmation of speculation. No servant is to enter Her Grace's rooms except Ellis, Mrs. Ellery, or by my direct order. Is that understood? Mr. Vale bowed. Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Ellery curtsied. Yes, Your Grace. Tristan took one step toward the door, then stopped. If Lady Augusta asks for the Duchess's keys, she is to be told they remain with me. Mrs. Ellery lifted her eyes. For the first time that evening, her composure faltered into something dangerously close to relief. Yes, Your Grace. He left before either servant could see that he did not know where he meant to go. The house had never felt large to him before. Marenford House had been built for men who enjoyed being obeyed across distance, with long corridors, high ceilings, and rooms arranged to make visitors understand consequence before they reached the drawing room. Tristan had always moved through it as its master. Now every polished surface seemed to reflect a question. He passed the blue salon where Honoria had received callers he had not cared to meet. He passed the stair where she had once paused to tell him that the west banister was loose, and he had answered without looking up from a letter. He had ordered it repaired. He had not thanked her for noticing. At the door to her sitting room, he hesitated. That hesitation angered him. It was his house. She was his wife. Yet the door felt less like property than permission. He opened it quietly. The room smelled faintly of lavender water, sealing wax, and the particular dry warmth of paper kept in careful stacks. There was no disorder. Honoria had not left like a woman in hysterics, despite what Lady Augusta would certainly imply by morning. Her embroidery frame stood near the window, with a needle threaded in pale blue silk. A shawl lay folded over the back of a chair. On the writing desk, a shaded lamp still burned, its flame turned low. Beside it rested a single sheet of paper addressed not to Tristan, but to His Grace, the Duke of Marenford. The formality landed harder than accusation. He picked it up. Her handwriting was beautiful, controlled, and entirely without tremor. A house that does not require its duchess does not require her keys. Nothing more, no plea, no reproach, no explanation he could answer with authority. Tristan read the sentence again, and this time he noticed the objects around it. 3 invitations lay corrected in her hand, one moving Lady Radbourne farther from the draught because of a lingering cough. Tristan had not known she possessed. A memorandum listed the dietary restrictions of 4 guests, including Lady Augusta's preferred claret, and a note that Sir Emmet Pike must not be seated near political opponents after wine. Beneath that rested a ledger opened to the Alderwick Widows' Relief Fund. Honoria had marked 2 columns in pale pencil. One was labelled disbursement. The other was labelled received. The figures did not match. Tristan's attention sharpened. He turned one page, then another. There were more notes. Missing receipt from Morvale recommendation. Ask steward again. No reply from T. After letter of March 14th. He stared at the initial. T. Not your grace. Not my husband. Just the mark of a man she had tried to reach and failed. A second book lay beneath the ledger, the silver inventory. Honoria had marked a missing tag from the reserve cabinet, a small item of no great value except that it corresponded to the labels on her keys. Tristan looked back toward the desk, then to the key ring in his palm. He had thought she carried household ornaments. She had carried entry to every place where truth could be locked away. A soft knock came at the open door. Mr. Vale stood outside, carefully not crossing the threshold. Forgive me, Your Grace. Ellis has returned from seeing Her Grace safely into the carriage. Tristan turned. Where has she gone? Bath, Your Grace, to Lady Beatrice Penrith. Not to her father, not to Westmere House, where her family could bundle her shame into advice and send her back by noon. Bath meant distance. It meant thought. It meant she had chosen a refuge beyond his immediate command. With Ellis? He asked. Yes, Your Grace, and 2 footmen to ride behind until the posting in. Tristan almost said he had given no such order. Then he understood. Honoria had. Even in leaving him, she had arranged propriety and safety and silence with the competence he had just toasted in another woman. The words returned with a force that made him close his eyes for one brief second. Whose grace has long been a blessing to this house. He opened them and found Mr. Vale still waiting. The butler's face revealed nothing. That too was a kind of judgment. Send word to the stables, Tristan said. A carriage at dawn. For Bath, your grace? Tristan looked once more at Honoria's note, at the ledgers, at the corrected invitations, at the empty chair by the cold hearth where his wife had evidently spent years keeping his world from embarrassing him. Yes, he said, for Bath. Then he folded her note with care, placed it inside his coat, and took the key ring with him when he left her room. This time, its weight was impossible not to feel by the time the first pale light touched the hills outside Bath. Honoria had learned that leaving a house could be quieter than enduring one. The road from London had been long, cold, and full of the small discomforts no one put into romantic stories. Her back ached from the carriage seat. Her gloves smelled faintly of damp wool. Ellis had dozed in little starts across from her, waking whenever the wheels jolted over ruts, or whenever Honoria shifted too suddenly. 2 Marenford footmen had ridden behind them as far as the last posting inn, proper and silent, because Honoria had remembered propriety even in the moment when her heart had forgotten how to beat normally. She had not looked back, not once. That had required more strength than crying would have done. Crying would at least have given her body something to do with the injury. Instead, she had sat upright beneath her grey cloak, with her hands folded in her lap, watching London thin into road into darkness, and darkness into a morning that did not yet know she had ceased to be useful to the man whose name she carried. Bath appeared through a veil of mist, pale stone rising in terraces, respectable and distant, as if the city itself had mastered the art of looking composed after disappointment. Lady Beatrice Penrith lived in a honey-coloured house on a quiet crescent, not the grandest address in Bath, but one that had never apologized for being sufficient. A black wreath had hung on that door 12 years earlier when Sir Alaric Penrith died, and left his widow with less money than his manners had promised. Since then, Lady Beatrice had arranged her life with terrifying efficiency, rejecting pity, creditors, and 2 elderly admirers with equal firmness. Honoria had always loved her a little for that. The door opened before the footman could knock twice. Lady Beatrice stood in the hall, wearing a dark morning gown, her silver hair braided beneath a lace cap, her spine as straight as a soldier's, and her eyes far too perceptive to be softened by sleep. She looked at Honoria's face, then at the small valise, then at Ellis behind her. She did not ask whether there had been a quarrel. She did not ask whether the Duke knew. She merely held out both hands. "Come in, my dear. You're frozen." The contraction in that ordinary sentence almost undid Honoria. Not sympathy, not alarm, just welcome. She stepped over the threshold and felt, for the first time in 5 years, that entering a house did not mean being measured for usefulness. "I am sorry to arrive so early," Honoria said. Her voice sounded careful and far away. "Nonsense. Scandal keeps poor hours. Tea keeps better ones." Lady Beatrice turned toward the maid hovering near the stairs. "Martha, hot water for her grace, and breakfast in the small parlour. Ellis, you look half dead. There's a room below stairs where you may sleep after you've helped your mistress." Ellis curtsied with visible gratitude. "Thank you, my lady." Honoria removed her gloves slowly. Her fingers were stiff. The motion brought her hand to her waist, and for one foolish instant she expected the familiar weight to be there. Nothing. The absence struck again, small and sharp. Lady Beatrice noticed. Of course she noticed. "You left them?" she asked. Honoria did not pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." "Good." Honoria looked up. The answer had been too swift, too certain. "You do not know what happened." "I know you. That will do until tea." The small parlour faced the back garden, where winter bare branches trembled in the morning wind. A fire had been lit, and the room held that blessed, modest warmth of a house run by someone who understood comfort was not extravagance. Honoria sat because Lady Beatrice pointed to a chair. Ellis removed her cloak, made a small, distressed sound at the travel creases in her gown, then controlled herself and went to prepare her mistress's room. When they were alone, Lady Beatrice poured tea strong enough to revive a bishop. "Now," she said, "tell me only what you can say without making yourself smaller." Honoria wrapped both hands around the cup. The heat steadied her. There was a dinner. In Mayfair, there is always a dinner. Tristan gave a toast. Lady Beatrice's face did not change, but her eyes sharpened. To whom? Honoria took one breath. Lady Morvale. The name settled between them like a draught under a door. Lady Beatrice had never approved of Cecily, Countess of Morvale. She had once described her as a woman who could make kindness feel like a receipt presented for payment. "Ah," she said, "and he praised her for what you had done." Honoria looked at her aunt. "How did you know?" "Because men rarely insult their wives with invention. They usually borrow the wife's labor and hand it to another woman by mistake." A laugh rose in Honoria's throat, brittle and dangerous, but it did not escape. The table understood. Tables often do. Husbands are slower. Honoria stared into the tea. I placed the keys on the salver and left. Lady Beatrice sat back. For the first time, satisfaction warmed her expression. "Then you did not flee, you punctuated." Honoria closed her eyes. Something inside her trembled. Everyone will say I behaved childishly. Everyone says whatever protects the arrangement that fed them. They will say I was jealous. Were you? Honoria opened her eyes. No, or not in the way they will mean it. I was not jealous because he admired another woman. I was ashamed because he had needed me for years and still did not see me. I was tired of being the invisible mechanism that allowed him to appear gracious. Lady Beatrice nodded once, as though Honoria had finally named the proper illness. Then do not let them call it jealousy. It was recognition. Silence moved through the room, not empty now, but clean. Honoria set down her cup and reached into the pocket sewn inside her traveling cloak. There is something else. She drew out a small key, no longer than the top joint of her thumb. It had slipped from the ring weeks ago when the chain caught on her writing desk, and she had meant to have it fixed. She had forgotten, or perhaps some quieter part of her had not. The little brass key lay in her palm, dull from use. Lady Beatrice leaned forward. You did not leave them all. This one opens my private desk at Marenford House. Honoria closed her fingers around it. I kept copies of letters there, notes about the Audiobook Widows' Relief Fund, missing receipts, and the altered household accounts. I wrote to Tristan about them more than once, and he did not answer. No. She wanted to say he had ignored her, but now that she was away from the house, certainty felt less simple. At least, I believed he did not answer. Lady Beatrice watched her carefully. That is not the same statement. No. Honoria looked toward the window, where Bath's pale morning spread over stone and chimney smoke. Last night, before the dinner, one of the account pages was not where I had left it. Lady Morvale spoke, as though she knew something about the household arrangements she should not have known. Lady, Augusta has been unusually eager to see me surrender the charity books to her secretary. Then the toast was not merely an insult. It may have been useful to someone. The admission chilled her more than the journey had. Pain she could understand. Neglect she had lived with long enough to map its rooms. but manipulation suggested doors opening behind her, papers moved by hands she had not seen, and her husband's blindness turned into a weapon for someone else's convenience. Lady Beatrice rose and crossed to a small escritoire. "You will write nothing today except a note saying you arrived safely. To Tristan?" "To your father first. He must not hear from gossips that his daughter has left her husband's roof. Keep it brief, respectable, uninteresting." Honoria almost smiled. "And to Tristan?" Lady Beatrice looked back. "That depends. Do you want to be summoned or heard?" The question entered Honoria gently and stayed there. She thought of Tristan, standing at the end of the table, glass lifted, beautiful and certain. She thought of his face when she placed the keys down. Shock, not understanding. Possession disturbed before conscience awakened. "He will come," she said softly. "Likely. He will want the keys returned. Men often mistake the symbol for the wound." Honoria stood and walked to the window. A carriage rolled along the crescent below. Two ladies, with a maid behind them, paused near the railings, heads bent together in the unmistakable posture of gossip beginning its morning walk. By noon, Bath would know that the Duchess of Marenford had arrived without her husband. By evening, someone in London would have improved the story. By tomorrow, Honoria would be jealous, unstable, ungrateful, or ill, depending on which version best pleased the teller. She pressed the small key into her palm until its edge reminded her. She still possessed one door no one else had opened. "I do not want to be pitied," she said. Lady Beatrice came to stand beside her. "Then do not perform injury for them. I do not want to be rescued back into the same life. Then do not mistake rescue for repair." Honoria looked at her aunt, and for the first time since the dinner, the ache in her chest made room for something steadier than grief. "I left because I could not remain silent." "Good." Lady Beatrice touched her arm, brief and firm. "Now decide what your silence has been protecting." At that moment, Martha entered with a silver tray and a folded note. "A boy brought this from the pump room, my lady." Lady Jersey's companion recognized her Grace's carriage at dawn. Lady Beatrice took the note, read it, and gave it to Honoria without comment. The words were only gossip dressed as concern. "Is it true the Duchess of Marenford has come to Bath for her health after a distressing scene in London?" Honoria read the line twice. Her health. A distressing scene. Already the world was making her smaller, so the room that hurt her could remain comfortable. She folded the note once, very neatly, and placed it beside her cup. "I will not be ill for their convenience," she said. Lady Beatrice's smile was thin and proud. "No, my dear. I rather thought you would not." The carriage was ordered for dawn. But Tristan Devereux did not leave Marenford House when the horses were brought round. That failure, small as it was, offended him more than the sleeplessness. He had built his life on movement once a decision was made. A bill required opposition. He opposed it. A tenant needed relief after flooding. He sent timber and grain. A steward lied over figures. He dismissed the man before dinner. Yet, when the first grey light reached the windows of his study, and the keys lay beside Honoria's folded note on his desk, he remained where he was, one hand braced on the blotter, reading the same sentence until its quietness became intolerable. A house that does not require its duchess does not require her keys. There were no tears in the ink, no dramatic underlining, no plea designed to wound him into pursuit. Honoria had simply written the fact and left him to stand inside it. The house had responded to her absence before he did. Breakfast arrived without the pear preserves she preferred, but never ate unless urged. The morning tray lacked the little dish of sugared lemon peel Lady Augusta liked, because Honoria was not there to remember that his aunt complained of sweetness while reaching for it twice. A footman placed the post in the wrong order with estate letters beneath social invitations, and then looked stricken when Tristan noticed. Nothing collapsed. That was almost worse. The house continued, but its grace had gone thin, like a voice pretending not to tremble. At 10:30, Lady Augusta entered without waiting for a proper announcement. She wore mourning black, though no one had died, which seemed to Tristan both theatrical and premature. "You cannot go to Bath," she said, before the door had closed behind her. Tristan looked up from the Alderwick ledger. "Good morning to you as well. Do not be clever, Tristan. It doesn't suit a crisis. Then perhaps we should avoid making one." Lady Augusta's mouth tightened. "Your wife made one last night. If you chase after her at once, everyone will say she has brought you to heel." "Everyone," he repeated, "a useful person, never present, always obeyed." She ignored that. "You must give society a simple explanation before it invents an ugly one. Her grace is fatigued. Her health is delicate. She has gone to Bath under medical advice. There, respectable and dull." Tristan closed the ledger. "Honoria is not ill. Not physically, perhaps. Take care." The two words were quiet. Lady Augusta heard the warning and lifted her chin. "I am trying to preserve your household." "No," he said. "You are trying to preserve its appearance." A flash of irritation crossed her face. "Appearance is what society sees. You would know that if you had not allowed that girl to make you look a fool at your own table." That girl, his wife, the Duchess of Marenford. Tristan stood so abruptly that Lady Augusta stopped speaking. He had allowed many things, he realized. Too many. Her Grace's rooms are to remain untouched. Her place as mistress of this house is not vacant. "My dear boy, someone must manage matters while she indulges this display. Mrs. Ellery will continue under existing instructions." Instructions left by Honoria? "Yes, you cannot mean to be governed by a woman who abandoned her keys in front of guests." Tristan placed his palm over those keys before he could stop himself. The gesture was protective, instinctive, and far too late. She did not abandon them. She returned responsibility to the person who failed to understand it. Lady Augusta stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue. Before she could answer, Miss Vale appeared at the doorway. "Lady Morvale has called, Your Grace." Tristan's gaze went to the clock. A little after 11, proper enough for a morning call, improper enough in context to be revealing. Lady Augusta's expression softened with relief. "Show her in, Vale. We need a woman of sense." Tristan did not countermand the order. He wanted to see what Lady Morvale would do when she believed the room already inclined toward her. Cecily, Countess of Morvale, entered in dove-coloured silk, dressed for sympathy and victory in equal measure. Her bonnet ribbons were pale violet. Her gloves were immaculate. Concern rested on her face so delicately that a less suspicious man might have feared it would break. "Your Grace," she said to Tristan, then turned to Lady Augusta. "I came as soon as I dared. I couldn't sleep after last night." "Nor could any of us," Lady Augusta said. "Sit, my dear." Cecily sat near the fire, close enough to be intimate, not close enough to be accused of it. "I do hope Honoria reached wherever she intended safely." Tristan heard the faint emphasis. Wherever she intended, as if his wife had fled without sense or direction. "She is in Bath with Lady Beatrice Penrith." "Ah," Cecily lowered her eyes. Then she chose well. "Lady Beatrice is fond of strong opinions. So is Honoria," Tristan said. Cecily's smile flickered, then returned. Of course. I only meant that a woman in distress requires indulgent company. You believe my wife is in distress? How could she not be, to relinquish the symbols of her place in such a public manner? Cecily paused, allowing delicacy to do the work of accusation. It suggests a heart overburdened. Lady Augusta leaned forward. That is precisely what I have said. Tristan watched Cecily's hands. They remained folded, white gloves smooth over white fingers. Too smooth. You were praised last night for easing a difficult season, he said. What difficulty did you ease? Cecily looked up. I beg your pardon. My words were specific. I wish to understand them. Lady Augusta made a small, impatient sound. Tristan, don't interrogate a guest. I am asking Lady Morvale to explain the service she rendered my house. Cecily gave a gentle laugh. You are too exacting. I did nothing grand. I merely offered calm where I could. Where? At table in conversation. Lady Augusta was anxious that the evening not feel strained. The seating cards were altered before dinner. Her lashes lifted. Were they? Honoria corrected them. Then she was attentive. The compliment sounded harmless. It was not. Tristan heard what lived beneath it. Attentive, not graceful. Useful, not beloved. Lady Augusta sighed. Honoria has always had a talent for little duties. No one denies that. Tristan's jaw tightened. Cecily noticed, and her voice warmed. Please don't blame yourself, Your Grace. A house that does not require its duchess can wound a sensitive woman, even when no wound was intended. The room went still. Tristan did not move. Lady Augusta looked briefly confused, then annoyed by his silence. Cecily's face remained composed for one heartbeat too long. Tristan took Honoria's note from the desk drawer and laid it flat before him. He did not show it to them. He did not need to. That is a curious phrase, he said. Cecily's smile thinned. Which phrase? A house that does not require its duchess. Is it? I suppose the sentiment was plain to everyone last night. Not to me, Tristan said. Not until I read it in my wife's private hand. Colour touched Cecily's cheeks, a perfect blush of injury. Surely you don't imagine I read her Grace's correspondence. I have not yet said what I imagine. Lady Augusta rose. This is absurd. Cecily came here out of kindness. Kindness, Tristan said, has been very busy in my house. He rang the bell. When Mr. Vale appeared, Tristan did not look away from Cecily. Ask Mrs. Ellery to bring the household account cabinet key copies and the Alderwick relief ledger. Also the silver inventory book from her Grace's sitting room. Cecily stood. I should not intrude on domestic matters. You already have, he said. The words were not loud. They struck anyway. Lady Augusta drew herself up. You are forgetting yourself. Tristan finally turned to her. No, I am beginning to remember what should have been remembered. Mrs. Ellery arrived, with the books held carefully in both arms. She placed them on the desk and stepped back. Tristan opened the Alderwick ledger to the marked page he had seen earlier. The discrepancy remained, neat and damning. A transfer had been entered from the relief fund to a supplier he did not recognize. Beside it appeared Honoria's signature. At first glance, it was convincing. At second, it failed. Tristan knew his wife's writing. He had seen it on invitations, memoranda, small household notes, and letters he had answered too rarely. Honoria's H began with restraint, not flourish. This signature curved too prettily, as if someone had copied the shape of Grace without understanding the hand that made it. Mrs. Ellery, he said, who had access to this cabinet. The housekeeper's face paled. Her Grace, myself when instructed, and anyone to whom Her Grace gave the key. Did Her Grace give it to Lady Morvale? No, Your Grace. Did Lady Augusta request it? Lady Augusta inhaled sharply. Mrs. Ellery lowered her eyes. Her ladyship requested the charity figures be made available for review last Tuesday. Tristan looked at his aunt. Why? Because Honoria was becoming overburdened. Did she ask for relief? She never asks for anything properly. She simply goes silent and expects one to infer suffering. Cecily touched Lady Augusta's arm. Please, this is becoming unpleasant. Tristan turned another page. A receipt was missing. A notation beside the gap read, in Honoria's hand, Morvale recommendation. Ask again. His gaze lifted to Cecily. For the first time, her concern did not quite reach her eyes. I am leaving for Bath within the hour, he said. Lady Augusta stepped toward him. You will not. I will. And what shall I tell callers? Tristan gathered Honoria's keys and placed them in his coat pocket. Tell them nothing. If anyone asks after the Duchess of Marenford, you will say she is visiting Lady Beatrice Penrith and that her place in this house is honoured in her absence. Lady Augusta looked as if the sentence tasted bitter before she spoke it, and if they ask why she left. Tristan looked once at the forged signature, then toward the hall through which Honoria had walked away without once turning back. Then you may say, he answered, that her husband has gone to ask her. Tristan Devereux arrived in Bath with the look of a man who had crossed the country and found the distance too short for his conscience. His carriage stopped before Lady Beatrice Penrith's house, shortly after 2 o'clock, when the crescent had settled into the polite rhythm of afternoon calls, and every curtain seemed capable of reporting what it saw. He did not leap down like a desperate husband in a novel. Tristan had never done anything so untidy. He stepped onto the pavement in a dark travelling coat, removed his gloves, and handed his card to the footman, as though rank could still arrange the world into obedience. Inside, Honoria stood in the small parlour, with one hand resting on the back of a chair, and watched Lady Beatrice read the card without expression. The fire had burned low. A tray of untouched seed cake sat on the table, because 3 ladies had already called that morning, with concern sharp enough to cut bread. Honoria had received none of them. She had sent back civil refusals, each one phrased so precisely that no one could accuse her of rudeness without admitting they had hoped for weakness. Lady Beatrice turned the card between 2 fingers. Your husband has arrived. Honoria had known he would. She had not known her heart would answer the announcement before her pride could silence it. Is he alone? As far as a duke is ever alone. There is a coachman, 2 footmen, and a cloud of masculine certainty at the door. The corner of Honoria's mouth moved despite herself. Then she became still again. Let him wait. Lady Beatrice looked at her with approval that did not soften the challenge. For how long? Long enough to understand this is not Marenford House. Excellent. She handed the card back to the footman. His Grace may wait in the front drawing-room. Say her Grace will receive him when she is ready. The footman bowed and withdrew. Honoria heard the door close below. Then the faint, controlled movement of a large man entering a house that did not belong to him. The sound travelled up the stairs like a question. Ellis, who had been folding gloves by the window, looked at her mistress with anxious devotion. Would your Grace like the blue shawl? Honoria almost said no. Then she remembered the long journey. The gossip, the way Tristan had looked at Cecily beneath candlelight. She would not appear shattered, but neither would she dress herself as armour so heavy she could not breathe. Yes, Ellis, the blue one. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Honoria did not spend them dramatically. She checked the note she had written to her father, sealed it, and placed it beside the letters for the morning post. She asked Ellis whether the hem of her walking dress had dried from the earlier mist. She accepted Lady Beatrice's instruction to eat 2 bites of toast, because courage was easier when one had not fainted from stubbornness. Only then did she descend. Lady Beatrice came with her, not at her shoulder, like a guard, but several steps behind, the precise distance of a chaperone who trusted the woman she protected. Tristan stood when Honoria entered the drawing-room. That was expected. What was not expected was the brief change in his face. It was gone almost before she saw it, but not before it reached her. He looked as though he had prepared for anger, accusation, perhaps tears, and had not prepared for the calmness of a wife who had slept little, travelled far, and still chosen not to break before him. Honoria, he said. Her name sounded different in this room, less like an afterthought, more like something he had carried. She curtsied, not deeply, not coldly, perfectly. Your Grace. His jaw tightened at the title. Good. Let formality do some of the work Payne had done too long. Lady Beatrice sat near the window with her embroidery and did not pretend to sew. Tristan remained standing until Honoria took the chair opposite him. The space between them was not large, perhaps 8 feet, but it contained a dining table, 5 years, and a silver salver with keys upon it. Thank you for receiving me, he said. You sent a proper card. Did you think I would not? Last night I did not know what you would do. He absorbed that. No, I suppose you did not. Silence settled, but not comfortably. Honoria watched him remove a small wrapped bundle from inside his coat. He placed it on the table between them and unfolded the cloth. The mistress's key ring lay there, polished by her hand and chilled by his. The sight of it struck her with unexpected force. She had thought leaving the keys would free her from their weight. Instead, seeing them here made her remember every morning she had worn them. Every drawer opened, every account balanced, every problem solved before it could embarrass the Duke of Marenford. Tristan pushed them neither toward her nor away. I brought these, so I see. They are yours. Honoria looked at the keys, then at him. No, they are Marenford's. That was precisely the difficulty. He took the rebuke without flinching, which was new enough to be dangerous. Then they were entrusted to you. Entrusted? The word nearly made her smile. They were handed to me the week after our wedding, along with a list of duties and a house that had already decided I was a less graceful substitute for another woman. Tristan's eyes darkened. Cecily was never my wife. No, only the woman your house remembered to admire. Lady Beatrice's needle moved once through linen, a quiet approval. Tristan glanced toward her, then back to Honoria. What happened at dinner should not have happened. That is a very tidy sentence. It was a public insult. Her breath caught, though she did not show it. He had named it, not fatigue, not misunderstanding, not feminine sensibility. Insult. Yes, she said, it was. I was wrong. The words stood between them, severe and insufficient. Honoria wanted them. That was the humiliating part. Even now, some bruised place in her wanted to gather those 3 words and pretend they were enough. She folded her hands in her lap until the impulse passed. You were wrong last night, she said. But I did not leave because of one toast. Tristan looked at her fully. Then tell me why you left. Because the toast was merely the first honest thing said at that table. His brows drew together. Honoria. You thanked Lady Morvale for the peace of a house I had kept peaceful by becoming quiet. You praised her grace because mine had become invisible to you. You let your aunt speak of me as though I were a useful little clerk who had accidentally acquired a coronet. You allowed the household to behave as though I occupied a place another woman had deserved. I did not know you felt this. No, she said softly. You did not know. That has been the shape of our marriage. He went still. The words had landed. She saw it in the way his hand closed once on his glove, then opened. I found the ledgers, he said. The Alderwick relief figures, the altered signature. Honoria's pulse changed. You looked. Yes. Because I left, or because you believed me? The question struck him harder than she expected. He did not answer at once, and she respected him more for not lying quickly. At first, because you left. Honoria looked down at the keys. Thank you for the honesty. Then, because I began to understand that there were things in my house I had no right not to know. That was better. Not enough, but better. I wrote to you about the relief fund, she said, more than once. I did not receive those letters. She lifted her eyes. I am not yet certain whether that comforts me. It should trouble you. It troubles me. The word was quiet, but it changed the air. Tristan leaned forward slightly, then stopped, as though he had remembered this was not his study, and she was not a document he could draw closer for examination. Come back to Marenford House, he said. There it was. The expected command dressed as invitation. Honoria felt Lady Beatrice pause by the window. She did not need to look at her aunt for strength. The strength had already been lent. Why? She asked. Tristan seemed taken aback. Because you are the Duchess of Marenford. That is a title, not an answer. Because your place is there. My place was there 2 nights ago. It did not prevent my erasure. He breathed in through his nose, controlled and silent. Because there is a matter in the accounts, and I need your help to understand it. Now we are closer to truth. Pain crossed his face. It was not theatrical which made it worse. Because I wronged you, he said. Because I do not yet know the full measure of it. Because, if you remain here while gossip grows, I cannot protect you properly. Honoria looked toward the window, where 2 ladies across the crescent slowed their walk as if the pavement had suddenly become fascinating. Protect me, she repeated. From the scandal or from the lie? Both, and if protecting me from scandal requires hiding the lie. He did not answer quickly enough. There, she thought, there was the old Tristan, honorable, powerful, practical, and still tempted to make pain manageable by making it private. Honoria rose. He rose with her. The keys remained on the table between them. I will not return today. Honoria, don't let pride make this harder. Her eyes met his. Pride did not make this. Pride only kept me quiet while it was being made. He closed his mouth. She saw him choose restraint, and that choice, small as it was, unsettled her more than argument would have done. Then, what do you require? He asked. No one had asked her that in Marenford House, not plainly. Not without already deciding the acceptable answer. Honoria touched the back of the chair, steadying herself with furniture rather than hope. I require you to decide whether you came for your wife or for your reputation. Tristan's face changed. Only a little. Enough. She looked at the key ring one last time. Until you know the difference, those keys should remain with you. Lady Beatrice set down her embroidery. The meeting was over. Tristan bowed. Not as a husband dismissing a quarrel, but as a man leaving a room where he had not been granted victory. At the door, he paused. I will write before I call again. Yes, Honoria said, you will. He left with the keys in his coat and her question behind him. By evening, a London gossip sheet reached Bath, with a line already underlined by 3 eager hands. The Duchess of Marenford is said to have fled, because she could not bear the superior influence of Lady Morvale. Honoria read it once, Then she laid it beside her tea and felt something colder than grief take shape. They were not merely explaining her absence. They were trying to make her small enough to return. By the next morning, Bath had learned to lower its voice whenever Honoria entered a room. That was the first kindness society offered a woman it intended to consume. At the pump room, conversation did not stop. It thinned. Fans moved a little faster. Teacups paused halfway to mouths. Elderly gentlemen who had never cared for the Duchess of Marenford's health suddenly looked grave with concern. Ladies who had once envied her title now studied her face with the careful appetite of people hoping some sorrow had made her less beautiful. Honoria crossed the room beside Lady Beatrice Penrith, her gloved hand resting lightly on her aunt's arm, and felt every version of herself being invented before she reached the water. Jealous wife, delicate wife, ungrateful wife, proud wife. Poor Duchess, unable to hold what a wiser woman might have kept. She wore a slate-blue walking dress and a bonnet with no ornament but a narrow ribbon. Ellis had argued for the pearl pins, then stopped when Honoria looked at her in the mirror. There were mornings when adornment felt like pleading. This was not one of them. Lady Beatrice accepted 2 glasses of mineral water from an attendant and handed one to Honoria as though the room were not listening. "Drink, my dear. It tastes dreadful, which means people will insist it's good for you." Honoria lifted the glass. "If I faint, they will call it confirmation. Then don't faint. Spite is an excellent restorative." Honoria nearly smiled. That small movement drew 3 glances from across the room. Even cheerfulness, she discovered, could be used against a woman if people had already chosen her wound. Near the windows, Lady Jersey's companion stood with Mrs. Valem, a magistrate's sister who had the soft voice of a pillow and the instincts of a knife. "Her Grace looks very composed," Mrs. Valem murmured, just loudly enough. One does wonder whether composure after such a scene is strength or calculation. Lady Beatrice turned her head. "In my experience, Mrs. Valem, people most suspicious of composure are those who've never possessed it." Mrs. Valem coloured. Honoria sipped the water and let the bitterness settle on her tongue. It was useful to taste something worse than gossip. A gentleman bowed. A matron asked after her health, with the fervour of a woman asking after a funeral. Honoria answered each inquiry evenly. "I am quite well, thank you." Every time she said it, she felt the lie society preferred being denied a little more firmly. By noon, the gossip sheet arrived at Lady Beatrice's house, folded inside 3 separate calling cards. Lady Beatrice threw 2 into the fire unread. Honoria kept the 3rd. She sat by the parlour window, while winter light lay pale across the carpet, and read the column with a steadiness that cost her more than the room would ever know. The Duchess of M, long admired for her quiet domestic habits, has withdrawn to Bath following a distressing misunderstanding at a recent dinner. Sources close to the family suggest Her Grace has struggled beneath the comparison to a lady of superior social ease, whose influence in the Duke's circle has been both long-standing and much valued. One hopes rest and gentle guidance may restore harmony to a noble house too important to be unsettled by feminine sensibility. Honoria folded the paper once, then again. The movement was exact, but inside her something old and tired rose with a force almost like laughter. Feminine sensibility, gentle guidance, superior social ease. They had not even needed to name Cecily. They had simply built a little altar for her out of Honoria's humiliation. "Well?" Lady Beatrice asked from the writing desk. "Apparently I have unsettled a noble house with my nerves. How powerful of you!" I wish I felt powerful. Power rarely announces itself as comfort. Honoria set the folded sheet on the tea table. They are not merely saying I left. They are saying I was unfit to stay. That was always going to be the easier story. For whom? For everyone who benefited from you staying silent. Before Honoria could answer, Martha entered with the post. There was a letter from her father, full of alarm disguised as paternal command, and one sealed with the Marenford crest. The sight of Tristan's seal changed the temperature of the room. Lady Beatrice did not reach for it. She simply watched. Honoria broke the wax. The letter was shorter than she expected. Honoria, I have written to Mr. Calder of the Morning Register, and to 2 editors who value access to Marenford information more than careless wit. No statement is to be printed implying illness, instability, or jealousy on your part without answer from me. All invitations issued from Marenford House will continue to name you properly as Duchess of Marenford. Your rooms remain untouched. Your authority in the household remains acknowledged. I understand that none of this is repair. It is only the prevention of further harm. I will call again only if you permit it, Tristan. Honoria read the letter twice. The first time, she looked for command. The second, she looked for evasion. She found neither, which left her with the more difficult task of accepting that effort could be real and still insufficient. Lady Beatrice lifted one brow. Has he ordered you home? No. Has he excused himself? No. Good. The man may yet become inconvenient to his own pride. Honoria handed her the letter. Lady Beatrice read it and gave it back without comment. Honoria folded it carefully, but not as she had folded the gossip sheet. He is protecting my title. Yes, and my place. Yes, but not yet the truth. Lady Beatrice's eyes softened by the smallest degree. You have learned the distinction quickly. Honoria looked toward the window. Across the street, 2 ladies slowed again near the railings. One pretended to adjust her muff. The other looked directly up at the parlor, then away. I spent 5 years believing if I performed my duties well enough, truth would become visible. It did not. It merely became useful. At Marenford House that same afternoon, Tristan stood in the library with 3 letters sealed and a 4th unfinished. His handwriting had grown increasingly severe as the day passed. Mr. Vale waited near the door with the stillness of a man who knew better than to interrupt repentance while it was finding grammar. On the desk lay the gossip sheet, Lady Augusta's proposed note to callers, and the Alderwick ledger opened to the questionable transfer. Tristan had crossed out his aunt's phrase. Her grace rests under the care of relations. With such force the nib had torn the page. No one is to send that, he said. Yes, your grace. If any caller asks for the Duchess, they are to be told. Her grace is visiting Lady Beatrice Penrith. No mention of health, no mention of nerves, no mention of a misunderstanding. Yes, your grace. Tristan picked up an invitation newly arrived from Lady Morvale. It was written on thick cream paper and scented faintly with violets, a charity musicale for the benefit of the Alderwick Widows' Relief Fund, to be held at Morvale House, with the assistance of Friends of Marenford. Friends of Marenford. The phrase was an invasion dressed as courtesy. Lady Morvale had taken the very fund Honoria had marked in the ledger and placed herself at its centre before society could ask why the Duchess was absent from her own charity. Tristan read the card once, then he passed it to Mr. Vale. When did this arrive? An hour ago, your grace. Was it sent broadly? I believe so, sir, Mrs. Ellery heard from Lady Radbourne's maid that several houses received the same. Tristan's hand closed, not violently. Precisely. Lady Morvale is stepping into my wife's place, Mr. Vale said nothing. Servants had long careers because they understood when silence was safer than agreement. Tristan looked at the ledger again. The forged signature seemed more offensive each time he saw it. Not because it was clumsy, but because it was intimate. Someone had studied Honoria's hand closely enough to mimic the shape, yet not closely enough to understand the discipline beneath it. "Send a reply," Tristan said. "Marenford House acknowledges the invitation." Mr. Vale bowed. "Will your grace attend?" Tristan looked at the key ring resting beside the inkstand. He had carried it back from Bath because Honoria had refused it, and now it sat on his desk like a question no title could answer. "Not alone," he said, "but do not write that." That evening in Bath, another copy of Lady Morvale's invitation reached Lady Beatrice's house. Honoria read it while the fire settled low, and the room turned amber around her. The words Alderwick Widows' Relief Fund stood out as if ink could accuse. Lady Beatrice watched her from across the room. "She is bold." "No," Honoria said quietly. "She is confident that I will behave like a wounded wife and hide." "Will you?" Honoria thought of the widows at Alderwick, of Mrs. Bell with her crooked fingers, of young Anne Mercer, whose husband had died beneath a fallen beam, of the coins counted into envelopes because comfort to the poor arrived in exact amounts. She thought of the missing receipt, the false signature, and Tristan's letter saying he understood. Prevention was not repair. Then she set Lady Morvale's invitation beside the gossip sheet. 2 pieces of paper. 2 attempts to define her, Honoria said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I will attend." Smiled slowly. "Then we had better choose a gown that doesn't ask permission." Honoria looked down at her empty waist, where the mistress's keys no longer rested, and for the first time their absence did not feel like loss. It felt like room. Morvale House glittered, as though guilt could be hidden beneath enough candlelight. By 8 o'clock, its drawing room had become a theatre of sympathy, music, and calculated curiosity. A harp stood near the far windows. A soprano in white muslin waited beside the pianoforte with her sheet music trembling in her hands, though no one was truly listening for song. They had come to see whether the Duchess of Marenford would appear. They had come to decide whether pain had made her smaller. Honoria knew this before she stepped from Lady Beatrice Penrith's carriage. She saw it in the faces at the windows, in the swift movement of curtains, in the footman's momentary confusion when he recognized her. Her gown was not grand. Lady Beatrice had chosen it with ruthless intelligence. A deep blue silk with no excessive lace, no pleading pearls, no widow-like severity. It did not ask society to pity her. It required society to look directly. "Remember," Lady Beatrice murmured beside her as they entered the hall, "you are not here to be forgiven." Honoria removed her gloves slowly. "No. And you are not here to perform injury." "No." "Excellent. Then let us disappoint everyone." The butler announced them with a voice that faltered only slightly. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Marenford, Lady Beatrice Penrith." The drawing-room changed before a single person moved. Conversation did not stop at once. It broke in pieces, one voice falling silent, then another, until the only sound was the faint scrape of the harpist adjusting her stool. Honoria stood beneath the archway and allowed the room to see her whole. Not abandoned, not ill, not frantic with jealousy, simply present. Across the room, Cecily, Countess of Morvale, turned with exquisite slowness, as though Honoria's arrival were a surprise arranged for her pleasure. She wore pale green silk and diamonds at her throat. But Honoria's attention went at once to the small ornament pinned just below her left shoulder. It was a brooch shaped like a key, delicate and silver bright, with a little engraved tag hanging from its bow. The room was too crowded for Honoria to read the mark, but something about the object tightened her breath. Lady Morvale came forward with both hands extended. "Your Grace, how brave of you to come." The word brave was soft enough to sound kind and sharp enough to bleed. Honoria placed her hand in Cecily's for one measured second. "How charitable of you to invite me to my own cause." A few eyes lifted. One fan snapped shut. Cecily's smile did not fail, but it had to work harder. All good causes belong to every generous heart, surely. Some also belong to the women who keep their accounts. Lady Beatrice coughed into her glove. It might have been amusement. Cecily guided them toward the center of the room, where Lady Augusta Fenwick sat like a black satin verdict near the fire. "Honoria," Lady Augusta said, "you look recovered." "From what, Lady Augusta?" The question was mild, too mild. Lady Augusta's lips thinned. "From travel, of course. Travel rarely harms a woman who chooses her destination." That produced a silence worth keeping. Honoria saw Mrs. Valham near the pianoforte, already storing every word for later use. Lord Radbourne stood near a marble column with his daughter, Lady Althea, who gave Honoria the smallest possible nod of respect. Not warmth, not yet, but respect had weight. Cecily touched the key brooch at her shoulder as if by accident. "I hope you will not think me presumptuous for arranging tonight. When one sees a noble effort in danger of being neglected, one does what one can." "The Alderwick widows have not been neglected," Honoria said. "Indeed." Cecily looked around, inviting the room to witness her pain at the correction. "How relieved I am to hear it. There had been concern." "Whose concern?" Cecily lowered her gaze. "My dear Duchess, don't ask me to embarrass anyone. I'm sure there has only been confusion." Honoria felt the trap then, not beneath her feet, but in the air. It had been built before she arrived. The music began, a nervous spill of notes. But the drawing room had already chosen the better entertainment. After the first song, Cecily rose and accepted a folded paper from a young man Honoria, recognized as Mr. Larkin, a secretary who had once been recommended for minor work at Marenford by Lady Augusta. He looked pale. Cecily held the paper without opening it immediately. "Before we continue, I wished only to thank those who have supported the Alderwick Widows Relief Fund. It has long been admired for its purpose, if not always for its management." A murmur moved through the room. Honoria remained still. Lady Beatrice's hand rested lightly on her cane. Cecily unfolded the paper. "I hesitate to speak of such matters in a social room, but when charitable money is concerned, silence may become its own cruelty." How neatly she did it, Honoria thought. A woman could be accused in the language of virtue and buried before she answered. Cecily continued. "A copied account was placed in my hands, showing a transfer authorized under Her Grace's signature. The sum was intended for widows at Alderwick, yet it appears to have gone elsewhere. I am certain there is an innocent explanation." Lady Augusta made a wounded sound. "Mrs. Valham whispered, 'How dreadful!'" Honoria looked at the paper, then at Cecily's face. "May I see it?" Cecily hesitated. Only a breath. "Of course." She crossed the room and placed the paper in Honoria's hand with the solemnity of a priest offering judgment. Honoria read the entry. The handwriting was close enough to disturb. The signature was prettier than hers, weaker in the first line and too decorative at the end. The date struck her next. March 14th, a day burned into memory not because of scandal, but because of rain, mud, and Mrs. Bell's cracked hands closing around an envelope at Alderwick. Honoria looked up. This is the document causing concern. Cecily's expression softened. No one wishes to accuse you. Then you should not have begun with an accusation. A faint shock moved through the room. Honoria did not raise her voice. That was why the words carried. She turned the paper slightly toward Lady Beatrice, who read it with one glance and then looked up sharply. Honoria returned her attention to Cecily. Why is this transfer dated March 14th? Cecily blinked. I beg your pardon? The date, March 14th. I don't keep every date in memory, Your Grace. I do when widows are waiting for money. The room changed again. The pity thinned. Curiosity sharpened. Honoria folded the paper once along its existing crease. On March 14th, I was at Alderwick in Derbyshire. I went there because 3 cottages near the North Road had flooded after 2 days of rain. Mrs. Bell, Mrs. Mercer, and Mrs. Hallow received relief payments from my hand that afternoon. Lord Radbourne, your cousin's steward, was there to discuss timber prices. He can confirm the date if he is asked. Lord Radbourne looked startled to be pulled from safety into usefulness. Then he cleared his throat. My steward did write to me regarding timber at Alderwick that week. I recall it because the roads were nearly impassable. Honoria did not look triumphant. Triumph would have cheapened the truth. She looked at Cecily's brooch instead. So I ask again, if I was in Derbyshire that day, who authorized this London transfer in my name? The harpist made a tiny sound, not music, simply a hand slipping against string. Cecily recovered with admirable speed. Perhaps the date was entered later. Clerks make mistakes. Then perhaps the clerk can explain why the signature attempts my hand and fails. Lady Augusta rose. Honoria, this is hardly the tone for a charitable evening. No, a man's voice said from the doorway. It is the tone for an accusation answered. Tristan had entered so quietly that half the room startled when they saw him. He wore black evening dress, severe and unadorned, but his face held none of the distant command Honoria knew from Marenford dinners. His gaze went first to her, not to Cecily, not to his aunt, not to the paper, first to her. It was a small thing. It was not small to her. He crossed the room and stopped beside Honoria, not in front of her. Beside. Your Grace, Cecily said, with a tremor that would have moved a kinder room. This has become most unfortunate. I only hoped to protect the widows. Tristan's eyes moved to the folded account in Honoria's hand. By presenting a charge against my wife before guests, no one called it a charge. I am calling it one. Silence fell complete. He looked around the room, and the authority that had once gathered silence now gave it purpose. No accusation against my Duchess will be entertained as drawing-room amusement. Honoria felt the words pass through the room and return to her, altered by the fact that they had been spoken publicly. She did not lean toward him. She did not forgive him, but she did not step away. Cecily's gloved fingers moved to the key-shaped brooch at her shoulder. Tristan's gaze followed the motion. For the first time that evening, his expression changed in a way only Honoria could read. Recognition. Not of the jewel itself, but of the small silver tag hanging beneath it. He stepped closer to Cecily, courteous enough to avoid insult and direct enough to prevent escape. That is an unusual ornament, Lady Morvale. Cecily's hand dropped. A trifle, nothing more. May I see it? Her smile tightened. Surely, Your Grace, you don't mean to inspect my jewelry. No, Tristan said. His voice was calm, and because it was calm, the room listened harder. I mean to inspect the silver tag attached to it. Honoria looked at the brooch again. This time, the engraving caught the candlelight. Not a decorative flourish. Not a maker's mark. A tiny label. Silver book. The missing tag from the Marenford inventory. The one that should have hung from the key to the drawer where the truth of the household silver was kept. Cecily's face remained lovely. For 1 second, it was no longer composed, and in that single second, everyone saw that the Duchess without keys had found the first lock. The first mistake Tristan made after Morvale House was believing that truth, once glimpsed, would behave like a gentleman and wait to be properly introduced. He escorted Honoria and Lady Beatrice to their carriage beneath the hard white glow of the entrance lamps, while whispers collected behind the curtains upstairs. No one had accused Lady Morvale aloud after the silver tag was noticed. Society rarely struck when it could circle. Cecily had laughed softly, touched the brooch as though embarrassed by its prettiness, and explained that she had purchased the trifle from a Bond Street jeweller who specialized in repurposed ornaments. A plausible answer. Too plausible, the sort of answer prepared before the question. Tristan had not challenged her further in the drawing room, and Honoria had understood why. There had been widows, charity, guests, music sheets, still trembling on stands, and a false account folded in her own hand. A public quarrel would have given Cecily what she wanted, an image of Marenford disorder with Honoria at its centre. Yet understanding his restraint did not make it easier to bear. By the time the carriage door closed, Honoria's composure felt like a dress laced too tightly. Lady Beatrice sat opposite her, silent and watchful. Tristan remained outside with one hand on the carriage door. "I would speak with you tomorrow," he said. Honoria looked at him through the narrow opening. "In Bath?" "No, at Marenford House." The answer came too quickly. She heard what lay beneath it before he explained. His house, his ground, his ability to contain. Lady Beatrice's eyes sharpened in the shadows. Honoria kept her voice calm. "Why?" Tristan's gaze flicked toward the front steps, where two ladies had slowed in open curiosity. "Because this must be settled carefully." "Carefully," she repeated, or quietly. His mouth tightened. "Those are not always enemies." They were tonight. "Honoria, don't mistake caution for cowardice. Don't mistake concealment for protection." The word struck him. Good. They needed to. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I believe you. The account was false. The signature was false. The ornament deserves inquiry. But if this becomes public, before we understand every piece, Cecily's will turn the room against you. My aunt will help her. Half of London will prefer a tale of a jealous duchess to a fraud in a drawing room." "Then let them prefer it," Honoria said. "Preference is not truth. Truth without timing can be destroyed. And truth hidden for my sake looks very much like shame." He went still. The horses shifted. Somewhere behind him, the door of Morvale House opened, and a spill of laughter escaped, brittle and high. Honoria saw Tristan hear it, saw him calculate, saw him choose the wrong necessity. "Come to Marenford House tomorrow," he said. "Let me examine the ledgers, speak with the servants, and arrange the matter through proper channels. No public answer yet, not until I can make it unassailable." Honoria looked at the man she had once wished would notice the weight of her silence. Now he noticed too much, and still did not understand enough. "You stood beside me tonight," she said. "I did, before you had all the proof." "Yes." "Then do not ask me to disappear until proof makes me convenient to defend." His face changed, not with anger, but with a hurt he had not earned the right to show. "That isn't what I'm asking. It is exactly what you are asking. You simply believe kindness changes the shape of it." Lady Beatrice, tapped the carriage wall with her cane. The coachman straightened. Tristan stepped back because propriety required it, but his eyes remained on Honoria. "I will write," he said. "Yes," she answered. "You seem to prefer documents when courage becomes untidy." The carriage moved before regret could soften the sentence. Honoria did not look back. She had already done that once in her marriage, and it had cost her 5 years. By morning, London had learned a new version of the story. It arrived in Bath, wrapped in expensive paper, sealed by no one, copied by everyone. Lady Beatrice's parlour had become a battlefield of calling cards by noon. Though Honoria received none of their owners, she stood beside the mantel, while her aunt read the newest sheet aloud in a voice so dry it could have preserved flowers. It is whispered that a certain duchess, finding herself unable to command admiration by gentleness, has sought to command it by absence. A private letter, said to be in her own hand, reveals the calculation beneath a recent display of wounded dignity. One hopes His Grace will be guided by wiser heads than those who encourage domestic theatrics. Lady Beatrice lowered the paper. Domestic theatrics, how disappointing. I had hoped for treason. Honoria held out her hand. "May I see it?" "You may, but you may not burn the house down afterward. I have only just had the carpets beaten." The printed paragraph was bad enough. The copied letter beneath it was worse. It was not a true reproduction, only quoted lines, allegedly taken from correspondence. "If I leave, he will have no choice but to follow. If he wishes his household restored, he must learn to praise me before witnesses." Honoria read the words once, then again, feeling the peculiar chill of seeing her pain dressed in a stranger's vanity. The phrasing was clever. Not hers, but close enough to wound, the kind of falsehood that did not need to convince those who knew her. It only needed to satisfy those who did not. "I never wrote this," she said. Lady Beatrice's expression did not move. "Of course you didn't. It sounds like a woman they already wanted me to be. That is why it will travel." Honoria folded the sheet carefully. Her hands did not shake, which seemed almost cruel. Some part of her wanted visible evidence of injury. Instead, her body had learned discipline so well that even slander could not make it honest. Who would have had access to my paper? At Marenford House. Yes, too many people. If Lady Augusta was directing rooms, she had no right to direct. A knock came before Honoria could answer. Martha entered with a letter on a salver. "From His Grace, my lady. Sent by express." Honoria took it. The wax bore the Marenford seal. For one foolish heartbeat, hope lifted its head. Then she broke the seal and read, "Honoria, a false letter is circulating. I know it is false. I ask you to remain in Bath and receive no callers until I have traced its source. Lady Augusta urges that I announce you are under strain, which I will not do without your consent. Still, some explanation may be required to stop further harm. If we state that you withdrew for rest after an unpleasant misunderstanding, the sharper stories may lose force. I do not ask this to diminish you. I ask because I fear what they will do with silence, Tristan." Honoria lowered the letter slowly. Lady Beatrice watched her face. "Well, he knows it is false. Good. He asks me to receive no callers. Less good. He says Lady Augusta wants him to announce I am under strain. Infuriating, but predictable." Honoria looked at the final lines again. An unpleasant misunderstanding. Rest. Explanation. Softer words, smaller words. Words that would not call her guilty, only fragile. A velvet box for a living woman. He says he does not ask it to diminish me. Lady Beatrice's mouth hardened. Men are forever astonished that a gilded cage remains a cage. Honoria walked to the window. Rain had begun. fine and grey, making the crescent beyond the glass look distant. Somewhere in London, Tristan was likely standing over ledgers with his jaw set, believing himself honourable because he had refused the worst lie while still considering a gentler one. That was what hurt. He believed her, he was trying, and still he reached first for management. "He wants to spare me," Honoria said. "Perhaps. But he also wants to control the shape of the scandal. Yes. I am tired of being shaped." Lady Beatrice rose and crossed to her, then stopped waiting for him to decide what form the truth may take. Honoria looked down at the forged letter in the sheet, then at Tristan's real letter in her hand. Two menaces, different in spirit, similar in result. One made her scheming. The other risked making her delicate. Neither made her heard. "My private desk," she said. Lady Beatrice nodded. "The small key." Honoria went to the escritoire, where she had placed the little brass key in a porcelain dish the night before. It looked insignificant among hairpins, sealing wax, and a folded ribbon from her travelling cloak. Yet it opened the only place where she had kept her own record of what Marenford House had refused to hear. "The copied letters are still in London," she said, "in my sitting-room desk. Then someone must retrieve them. Ellis cannot. She would be watched. Nor can you return alone." Honoria closed her fingers around the key. "I do not need to return alone. I need to return before they understand I am no longer hiding." Lady Beatrice studied her. "That is a dangerous distinction." "No," Honoria said, and the steadiness in her own voice surprised her. "The danger was letting them write me in my absence." She crossed to the desk, took paper, and began a note to Tristan. "Not a plea, not a defence. A decision. Your Grace, I will not be described as unwell, overwrought, delicate, or in need of concealment. I will not receive callers for spectacle, but neither will I hide to make falsehood easier to manage. The small key to my private desk remains with me. In that desk are copies of letters I wrote before any of this became public. If you wish the truth, stop asking me to wait outside the room where it is decided." She sanded the ink, folded the page, and sealed it before doubt could become polite. Lady Beatrice smiled, not gently but proudly. "Now that," she said, "sounds like a duchess." Honoria looked at the little key lying beside the sealed letter. For the first time since leaving Marenford House, she understood that a key was not only a thing surrendered, it was also a thing used to open a door someone else preferred locked. Tristan received Honoria's note at Marenford House, just as Lady Augusta was explaining why a woman's reputation was safest when placed in the hands of people less emotional than herself. The irony was so perfect that he almost laughed, which would have alarmed every person in the room, including himself. His aunt stood before the library hearth with the newest gossip sheet folded in one hand and Moral Certainty in the other. Lady Morvale sat near the window, pale and composed, as though false letters and missing silver tags were unpleasant weather that had unfortunately touched her glove. Mr. Vale entered with the express from Bath on a salver, and Tristan knew the instant he saw Honoria's seal that whatever remained of the morning would no longer belong to his aunt. He broke the wax. He read the letter once, slowly. Then again, because shame had a way of making honest sentences heavier the second time. "I will not be described as unwell, overwrought, delicate, or in need of concealment. I will not receive callers for spectacle, but neither will I hide to make falsehood easier to manage. The small key to my private desk remains with me. In that desk are copies of letters I wrote before any of this became public. If you wish the truth, stop asking me to wait outside the room where it is decided." Tristan folded the note with care. Lady Augusta watched him. "Well," she demanded, "has she come to her senses?" He looked at his aunt, and for the first time in years he wondered how much cruelty had been protected by the word family. "She has kept them," he said. "Her senses, I mean." Lady Morvale's fingers tightened around her reticule, only slightly. Tristan saw it. "How admirable," Cecily said, "though one hopes courage doesn't become another form of self-injury." "You seem very concerned with injury that does not touch you," Tristan replied. Cecily lowered her eyes. "Your Grace, I've only wished for peace. Then you have chosen strange instruments." Lady Augusta stepped forward. "Do not take that tone with Lady Morvale. She has been more loyal to this house in 3 days than Honoria has been in this entire display." The old Tristan might have answered coldly, efficiently, and moved on. The old Tristan had mistaken restraint for justice. He was beginning to understand that silence, when placed beside falsehood, often served the falsehood best. "No," he said. The words stopped the room. "Do not speak of my wife as though she were an inconvenience created for your management." Lady Augusta stared. Cecily's face remained lovely, but the skin around her mouth grew taut. Tristan turned to Mr. Vale. "Send a reply to Lady Beatrice Penrith. Her Grace may come under her protection at whatever hour she chooses. No one is to observe, interrupt, or enter her Grace's sitting room without permission. Mrs. Ellery is to attend me in half an hour." "Yes, Your Grace, and send for Mr. Harcourt." Lady Augusta frowned. "The family solicitor is Mr. Pelling." "Mr. Pelling is your solicitor," Tristan said. "Mr. Harcourt will be mine for this matter." "You mean to put family business before a stranger. I mean to put truth before habit." He looked back at Cecily. "Lady Morvale, I must ask you to excuse me. Marenford House will not be receiving informal callers today." For one breath, no one moved. Cecily rose at last, graceful even in retreat. "Of course, I wouldn't wish to intrude." Tristan did not soften the silence by assuring her she had not. By late afternoon, rain had polished the London streets dark, and Honoria entered Marenford House through the side portico, with Lady Beatrice at her shoulder. She had chosen that entrance deliberately. Not the grand steps where passing carriages could slow. Not the servant's door, which would make her return seem furtive. The side portico was private, proper, and unmistakably hers. Mr. Vale bowed with a gravity that trembled at the edges. "Your Grace," Honoria paused. Something passed across his face, not pity, not quite apology, recognition. She gave him a small nod. "Mr. Vale." Tristan waited outside her sitting room. He had not entered. That mattered before she wished it to matter. The door behind him remained closed, and the key ring rested in his palm. For a moment, the corridor held all the words they could not safely speak. Lady Beatrice looked from one to the other. "I shall sit by the window inside and embroider something hideous, unless either of you gives me cause to do worse." Honoria almost smiled. Tristan bowed to Lady Beatrice, then to Honoria. "Thank you for coming. I came for the letters." "Yes." He held out the key ring, but not toward the desk. Toward her. "The others remain yours to refuse." "I thought you might need this." Honoria looked at the ring. Then she lifted the small brass key from the chain around her wrist, where she had tied it with blue ribbon for the journey. "Not that one." She opened the sitting room door herself. The room had not been disturbed. That, too, mattered. Her shawl remained folded over the chair. The lamp was trimmed. Her embroidery frame stood where she had left it, absurdly calm after so much ruin. She crossed to the writing desk and fitted the small key into the lock. The click sounded louder than it should have. Lady Beatrice took her seat by the window. Tristan stood several feet away, hands behind his back, as if proximity without permission had become an offence he would no longer commit. Honoria opened the lower drawer and removed a packet bound in grey ribbon. "These are copies," she said. "I began keeping them after the first reply failed to come." Tristan's face changed. "How many?" "5 concerning the relief fund, 2 concerning altered household accounts, 1 concerning Lady Morvale's recommendation of Mr. Larkin for temporary clerical assistance, 3 asking whether you wished the charity disbursements placed under your steward rather than my hand." She untied the ribbon and laid the letters on the desk in order. Her own handwriting faced them, neat and restrained. March 4th, March 14th, March 22nd, April 7th. Each date a little door into a room where she had waited and been answered by nothing. Tristan picked up the first. Only after she nodded, he read. Honoria watched his face rather than the page. She had once imagined this moment differently. In those imaginings, he read her old words and understood everything at once. He crossed the distance between them. He said that he had been blind. He made blindness sound romantic instead of negligent. Reality was quieter. He read one letter, then another, and with each page his expression became less duke and more man, confronted by the architecture of his failure. "I never received these," he said. The words were rough. "I know. I would have answered." "Would you?" He looked up. She had not spoken sharply. That made the question worse. "Yes, you answered estate memoranda. You answered Mr. Pelling. You answered Lady Augusta within hours when she complained of the music at dinner. I learned not to know what my letters were worth." He closed his eyes for 1 second. "Honoria, do not make my name an apology unless you intend to finish the work." Lady Beatrice made one decisive stitch by the window. Tristan looked back down at the papers. "Mr. Larkin," he said, "Lady Morvale's secretary. Not formally, recommended by her, approved by Lady Augusta. He had access to copied figures when I was told he was only drafting charity invitations." Tristan set the letter down. "Mrs. Ellery said, Lady Augusta requested the charity figures last Tuesday. She requested them often. She said I made too much of small sums. Those small sums were for widows." "Yes." Silence pressed against the walls. Then a knock came. Tristan turned. "Enter, Mrs." Ellery stepped inside, pale but composed. "Your Grace, Your Grace." She curtsied to both of them, which seemed to steady her. Tristan held up one of the copied letters. "Mrs. Ellery, when Her Grace sent letters from this room to my study, through whom did they pass?" The housekeeper swallowed. "Usually a footman, Your Grace, unless Lady Augusta was in residence." "And then?" Mrs. Ellery looked at Honoria, not Tristan. That was the first answer. "Then her ladyship instructed that household correspondence be placed on the silver tray in the morning room for review." Honoria felt her fingers turn cold. "Review by whom?" Mrs. Ellery's voice dropped. "By Lady Morvale when she was present. Her ladyship said Lady Morvale was assisting with arrangements too delicate to trouble you, Your Grace." Tristan went utterly still. No one spoke. Outside, a carriage passed in the rain. Its wheels sounded distant, ordinary, indecently calm. "My letters to my husband," Honoria said, "were given to Lady Morvale, Mrs." Ellery's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Not by my wish, Your Grace." Honoria believed her. That kindness hurt. "And the originals?" Tristan asked. "I do not know, sir. Some may have been forwarded. Some may have been returned to Lady Augusta's desk. I saw Mr. Larkin carry papers from the morning room twice." Tristan nodded once, the movement sharp with restraint. "Thank you. You will write that account for Mr. Harcourt when he arrives." "Yes, your grace." When the housekeeper left, Honoria looked at the copied letters spread across her desk. For months, she had believed she had been speaking into the sealed room of her husband's indifference. Now she learned there had been hands at the door. Yet the discovery did not absolve him. It only changed the shape of the wound. "They made silence between us," Tristan said. "They used the silence that was already there," Honoria answered. He accepted it. "That was new. I have sent for an independent solicitor, not Mr. Pelling, not anyone controlled by my aunt." "Good. I will find the originals. And if finding them humiliates Lady Augusta, then she will have earned humiliation honestly." Honoria looked at him then, really looked. He was tired, and not elegantly. There were shadows beneath his eyes. His coat was severe, his posture controlled, but the certainty had gone out of him, replaced by something less polished and more human. It did not repair what had been broken. It made repair seem less insulting to imagine. "I will meet you tomorrow," she said. "Not here." He waited. "In the dining room." The words moved through him. He understood at once. The first wound had been given there. The next truth had to stand where the lie had sat. "With Lady Beatrice nearby," he said. "Yes, and the keys?" Honoria gathered the copied letters and tied the ribbon again. "Keep them one more night." His gaze lowered to the key ring in his palm. "Why?" She closed the drawer and locked it with the small brass key. "Because I want to know whether you can hold responsibility without mistaking it for possession." Tristan did not answer. He bowed instead, and this time the silence between them did not feel empty. It felt like a door not yet opened, but no longer barred. The dining room at Marenford House looked smaller in daylight, which made its cruelty harder to excuse. Without candlelight, without silk shoulders turned toward one another in practiced admiration, without crystal throwing warmth over polished mahogany, the room became only a long table, carved chairs, ancestral portraits, and the place where Honoria had learned that a marriage could be publicly broken without a single raised voice. She entered at 11 in the morning with Lady Beatrice Penrith several steps behind her and Ellis waiting in the hall, proper witnessed, untouchable by gossip. Tristan stood at the far side of the table, not at its head. That was the first thing Honoria noticed. The Duke of Marenford had chosen not to occupy the seat from which he had wounded her. The second thing she noticed was the key ring placed at the center of the table on a folded square of white linen. He had not put it beside his hand. He had not placed it before her chair like a summons. It lay between them, where neither could pretend it belonged to one alone. "Thank you for coming," he said. Honoria removed her gloves with care. "I came because I said I would." Lady Beatrice moved to a chair near the sideboard and opened her reticule. "I shall be very occupied with my smelling salts unless one of you behaves foolishly." Tristan bowed. "Lady Beatrice, your grace." The old lady sat alert as a judge. Honoria took the chair nearest the middle of the table. Tristan remained standing until she was settled, then sat opposite her. The distance was perhaps 6 feet. Once, at dinner, it had seemed like a continent. Now it seemed like a test. He placed the packet of copied letters beside the keys. "Mr. Harcourt has reviewed these. He agrees they establish that you raised concerns before the public accusation began." "Before Lady Morvale found charity fashionable," Lady Beatrice observed. Honoria did not smile, though she wanted to. "And the original letters?" she asked. Tristan looked down at the table, then back to her. "Not yet found. Mrs. Ellery has given a written account. She confirms Lady Augusta directed household correspondence into the morning room when Lady Morvale was present. A footman remembers Mr. Larkin carrying papers from that room on 2 occasions. Remembering is not proof. No, it is a path toward proof. He accepted the limitation without irritation, which made Honoria listen more closely. I have also sent to Audiobook. The steward is to provide confirmation of your visit on March 14th and the payments made that day. The widows will remember. I know. He paused. I should have known before. There it was again. Not defense, not command. A sentence that did not ask to be comforted. Honoria rested her hands in her lap. The room had too much memory. She could see herself rising, feel the ring of keys warm from her waist, hear Cecily's soft voice, accepting praise she had not earned. Why did your family prefer Lady Morvale? She asked. Tristan stilled. He had expected accounts, perhaps letters. Not that, because Morvale had old connections to my mother's family, and Cecily had been raised to move through rooms like this one as though they existed for her. And I had not. You had integrity, intelligence, a dowry sufficient but not dazzling. Your father had a clean name. You were considered practical. The word landed exactly where he knew it would. Honoria saw regret cross his face before he continued. That is not why I married you. No, no. Then why? He looked at her hands, not possessively, as if remembering that they had carried every key his house had placed upon them. Because when your father first brought you to Marenford House, Lady Augusta spoke over you 3 times, and the 4th time you answered her so calmly that she did not realize she had been corrected until everyone else did. I thought then that you were the only woman in the room not performing. I told myself that was a sensible basis for marriage. A small ache moved through Honoria, sharp because it came too close to tenderness. Sensible. Yes, his mouth tightened. I made admiration sound like judgment because judgment felt safer. Safer than what? Wanting something I did not know how to ask for. The room went still. Even Lady Beatrice did not move. Tristan lowered his voice, but did not look away. That is not an excuse. I married you and let the house treat you as though you had been installed rather than chosen. I let my aunt mourn an arrangement that never happened. I let Cecily remain familiar where she should have been distant. I mistook your competence for contentment. Honoria's breath felt too shallow. She had wanted this, perhaps. Not the confession exactly, but the sound of him seeing the shape of the wound. Yet to hear it was not only relief, it was grief renewed. Because the truth had existed all along and could have been spoken years earlier if he had been less proud and she less trained to endure. You said the toast was a public insult, she said. It was. That is not the whole of it. No, it told the room I was a replacement. His eyes changed. Not surprise. Pain. Yes. Honoria looked at the keys. The wound was not adultery, Tristan. Do you understand that? He flinched slightly at his name, perhaps because she had not used it in days. I do. It was replacement. It was being given a title and denied a place. It was being useful enough to carry the keys and unworthy enough to be thanked only when another woman stood nearby. I understand. No, she said softly. You are beginning to. He accepted that too. The acceptance unsettled her more than argument would have. The Tristan she had known would have corrected the precision of the sentence. This one let it stand. He reached toward the keys, then stopped before touching them. I want to make this public. Honoria studied him. Do you? Yes, even if it makes you look foolish, especially then. Do not answer like a statesman. His eyes met hers. I'm not. The contraction, low and unguarded, felt strangely intimate. I looked foolish the moment I lifted that glass. The only question now is whether I will look foolish while lying or while telling the truth." Lady Beatrice murmured, "Better." Honoria ignored her aunt with effort. "And if the truth harms Lady Augusta, then family will not shelter what family helped break. And Lady Morvale? If she forged your signature, intercepted letters, or used the relief fund, she will lose Marenford patronage and face restitution through Mr. Harcourt. If the evidence proves more, we will proceed accordingly. Not quietly. No," he breathed in once, "but I would still ask that we gather the last proof before naming every charge before society." Honoria felt the old caution rise between them. This time, it did not sound like concealment. It sounded like structure. She tested it anyway. And who decides when there is enough proof? You do. The answer came at once, with Mr. Harcourt's advice if you wish it. Not Lady Augusta, not Cecily. Not me alone. Honoria looked at him for a long moment. Respect, she was discovering, could hurt almost as much as neglect when it arrived late. It pressed against all the places that had learned to live without it. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it. When the truth is spoken, it will be spoken in this house, in a room with witnesses, not hidden in letters between solicitors, not softened into an understanding among families. I will not be restored in private after being diminished in public." Tristan looked around the dining room as if seeing, perhaps for the first time, that walls remembered, agreed. The word was simple. It did not heal her. It opened a possible future in which healing would not insult the past. Honoria rose, needing movement before feeling made her too visible. Tristan rose with her. The keys remained on the table. He did not offer them. She did not take them. At the doorway, she paused. "You may send me any evidence through Lady Beatrice." "May I write to you as well?" The question was formal, almost awkward. That was why it mattered. Honoria turned back. "You may write if you have something true to say." His expression softened in a way she had rarely seen and never at dinner. "Then I will write carefully." She left before her face could betray how much that small promise cost her. Mr. Vale was waiting in the hall, but before he could escort them, hurried footsteps sounded from the servants' passage. Mrs. Ellery appeared, pale and breathless from restraint rather than speed. She stopped short at the sight of Honoria. "Your Grace, forgive me." Tristan stepped forward. "What is it?" The housekeeper held out a narrow folded page, protected in a clean handkerchief. "I found this in the cloakroom, sir." "In the glove box Lady Morvale's maid left behind after the musicale. I thought it was only packing paper until I saw the Marenford mark." Tristan took it, but he looked to Honoria before unfolding it. She nodded. He opened the page. The dining room seemed to draw in its own breath. Honoria recognized the ledger format instantly. So did Tristan. It was the missing page from the Audiobook relief accounts. At the bottom, in a clerk's hand, stood a transfer notation to Morvale estate obligations. Not charity, debt. Tristan looked from the page to Honoria, and in his eyes she saw fury disciplined into purpose. Honoria looked at the keys still lying on the table behind him. For the first time, they did not seem abandoned. They seemed to be waiting for the right lock. The missing ledger page changed the room more completely than any apology had done. It lay on the dining table between Honoria and Tristan, a narrow sheet of ruled paper, with Marenford's crest pressed faintly at the top, and a clerk's careful hand turning charity into debt with the neatness of a man who believed widows would never be invited to read accounts. Audiobook Widows' Relief, disbursement transferred, Morvale, estate obligations. Temporary settlement. Temporary. Honoria knew that word from household management. It was what people wrote when they intended never to return what they had taken. Lady Beatrice stood beside the sideboard, one hand resting on her cane, her face stripped of all amusement. Mrs. Ellery waited near the servant's door, pale but steady after delivering the page. Tristan read the entry twice. He did not curse. He did not pace. He became very still, which Honoria had learned long ago was what happened when his anger stopped being emotion and became decision. "Mr. Harcourt will take this at once," he said. "The dinner tomorrow will be cancelled. Lady Morvale can be confronted privately with the documents. My aunt will be removed from household authority before the week is out." Honoria looked at him. "No." He lifted his eyes. "No, you heard me. Honoria, this proves the fund was misused. It ties Morvale obligations to money collected under your patronage. If we proceed through solicitors first, the matter can be secured before Cecily has time to twist it. Before she twists it, or before anyone sees clearly who was twisted." His jaw tightened. "I am not trying to hide you." "Not this time, I know." The admission surprised him. It surprised her as well. She placed one gloved fingertip beside the ledger page, not touching the ink. "But you are still trying to move the correction into a private room, because that is where powerful families send discomfort to die politely." Lady Beatrice murmured, "A remarkably accurate description of half the drawing rooms in England." Tristan did not look away from Honoria. "What do you want?" There it was again, the question she had once thought no one in Marenford House knew how to ask. She drew breath slowly, because wanting justice aloud required a different courage from enduring pain in silence. The first wound was given at table, in this house, before people who were pleased to understand it. The answer will be given here as well. Mrs. Ellery's eyes flicked toward the table, then down. Tristan followed the movement and saw, perhaps, the echo of that night. His glass lifted, Cecily's lashes lowered, Honoria's keys striking silver. "A dinner," he said. "Yes, with whom? The same witnesses, as many as propriety will bear. Lord Radbourne, Lady Althea, Mrs. Valem, since she has fed on every version of my disgrace, Lady Augusta, Lady Morvale, anyone else who heard enough to repeat it and saw too little to question it." Tristan studied her, and she braced herself for refusal. Instead, he said, "And Mr. Harcourt, in the library, with the documents sealed and ready. Not at table. This is not a court, and I will not make widows into spectacle, but he will be close enough that no one can pretend there are no consequences after the candles are out." His gaze changed, respect arriving with a severity that was almost tenderness. "You have thought this through." "I have had several years of practice thinking while no one listened." Pain moved across his face, but he did not ask her to soften the truth. "Then we will do it your way." Honoria looked at the ledger page, then at the key ring still lying on the white linen where he had left it. "No, we will do it the truthful way. That is not the same as mine." A faint sound escaped Lady Beatrice, suspiciously like approval. Tristan turned to Mrs. Ellery. "You will speak with Mr. Vale. The dinner will be arranged for tomorrow evening. Formal, but not large. Her Grace will approve the seating." The housekeeper curtsied, and this time the gesture carried something deeper than duty. "Yes, Your Grace." Honoria stopped her gently. "Mrs. Ellery, Your Grace, no servant is to be punished for obeying orders given under Lady Augusta's authority, not unless they knowingly forged, removed, or profited." Mrs. Ellery's composure broke for a fraction of a second. "Thank you, Your Grace." Tristan looked at Honoria with something like wonder, and she found she could not bear too much of it. Do not admire me for being fair after forcing me to become so practiced at survival, she said quietly. I'm not admiring your survival. He answered, his voice lowered. I'm ashamed I mistook it for serenity. The words entered the room softly and stayed. Honoria did not forgive him, but she allowed the silence that followed. To be honest, which was more than Marenford House had offered her in years. By late afternoon, invitations had gone out under the Marenford seal, brief and impossible to refuse without creating curiosity. Mr. Harcourt arrived with a leather case and the careful expression of a solicitor who understood that aristocratic scandals often wore gloves but still left fingerprints. He examined the copied letters, Mrs. Ellery's statement, the forged account, the silver tag notation, and the missing ledger page. He asked precise questions. Honoria answered them without ornament. Tristan did not interrupt. That, too, became evidence of another kind. Once, he would have translated her competence for the room as though a husband's voice made a wife's mind more official. Now he sat beside the desk and let her words stand. Near 7, when the lamps were being lit, Mr. Vale entered with a small glove box wrapped in tissue. Lady Morvale's maid sent this, Your Grace, with apologies. She says it was taken from Morvale House, by mistake, after the musicale, and belongs here. Tristan opened it. Inside lay a pair of pale gloves, a folded scrap from a stationer, and nothing else. The missing ledger page had already been removed from the box. Someone had realized too late that the wrong thing had been left behind. Honoria looked at the empty space beneath the gloves. She knows. Tristan closed the box. Yes, then she will come prepared. So will we. Honoria met his eyes. No, she will come prepared to win a performance. We will come prepared to end one. The next evening, Marenford House shone with the disciplined beauty of a household that had decided not to tremble. The table was set for 14, not 30. Candlelight moved over crystal, silver, and white flowers, chosen without scent, so no one could complain of nerves. Honoria dressed in deep blue again, but tonight Ellis fastened at her throat a single pearl brooch that had belonged to Honoria's mother. No diamonds, no plea for rank, memory, restraint, and a face that refused to be made small. Before descending, Honoria stood before the mirror and felt, briefly, the old instinct to search her waist for the keys. They were not there. Not yet. Lady Beatrice waited in the corridor. You look like a woman about to make several people regret literacy. I feel like a woman about to dine with a knife beneath every napkin. Metaphorical knives, I trust. Entirely. Downstairs, the guests arrived with expressions polished into innocence. Lord Radbourne bowed more deeply than before. Lady Althea looked at Honoria with open respect now, though fear shadowed it. Mrs. Valem fluttered and murmured that she hoped all unpleasantness had passed. Lady Augusta entered as though summoned to an execution she considered socially inconvenient. Last came Lady Morvale, serene in ivory silk, a soft violet scent preceding her by several feet. The key-shaped brooch was gone. In its place she wore emeralds Honoria noticed, so did Tristan. Dinner began with terrifying civility. Soup was served, fish followed, conversation moved around weather, Parliament, a singer recently heard in Hanover Square, and the tiresome condition of roads after rain. Honoria answered when addressed. Tristan did not force attention toward her, but he did not let it slide away either. Each time Lady Augusta tried to speak over her, he returned the question to his wife with quiet precision. It was not enough to heal. It was enough to be seen. After the final course was cleared and wine was poured, Lady Morvale lifted her glass before Tristan could rise. The room held its breath. Her smile trembled with manufactured grace. "Before this evening goes further, may I offer a small sentiment?" Lady Augusta leaned back, satisfied. Honoria set her hands in her lap. Tristan turned his head slowly toward Cecily. Lady Morvale's eyes shone as she looked around the table. "To forgiveness," she said, her voice sweet enough to spoil the wine, "especially from wives who misunderstand kindness." For one perfect second, no one breathed. Lady Morvale's glass hung in the candlelight, her smile soft with triumph, and the room seemed to wait for Honoria to flinch. She did not. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, feeling the old wound open and discovering, with a strange calmness, that it no longer had the power to empty her of herself. Tristan rose before the silence could become Cecily's. His chair moved back with a quiet scrape that travelled down the table like thunder restrained by manners. He did not lift his glass. He placed one hand beside it and looked first at Honoria, then at every guest who had been present the night he had praised the wrong woman. "No," he said. The word was not loud. It ended the toast. Lady Morvale lowered her glass by an inch. "Your Grace?" Tristan looked at her without warmth. "Forgiveness requires truth. We will begin there." Lady Augusta stiffened. Mrs. Valem pressed a hand to her throat. Already, delighted and terrified by the prospect of being present at something she would later swear had distressed her deeply. Lord Radbourne sat very still. Lady Althea's eyes moved from Tristan to Honoria and stayed there with quiet attention. Tristan turned back to the table. "The last time I stood in this room with a glass in my hand, I gave honor where it had not been earned, and I withheld it from the woman who had earned it every day in silence." The words struck the table harder than accusation. Honoria felt them, not as cure, but as recognition. Tristan continued, "I praised Lady Morvale as a blessing to this house. I did so in front of my wife, before guests who understood the insult more quickly than I did. That was my failure. Not misunderstanding, not unfortunate phrasing, failure." Lady Augusta made a sharp sound. "Tristan, this is hardly necessary. It is more necessary than anything said at this table in years." His gaze did not leave the room. Her Grace, the Duchess of Marenford, corrected the seating that evening, prevented a political quarrel between guests, protected the service from public embarrassment, oversaw the details of this household, and for months had been attempting to warn me of irregularities in the Audiobook Widows' Relief Fund. I did not see her work because I had grown accustomed to benefiting from it. Silence deepened. This was not the silence of shock now. It was the silence of people recognizing that escape would require them to admit they had heard nothing. Cecily set down her glass. "How noble of you to defend your wife. Truly, it's touching. But grief and pride can make any household matter appear darker than it is." Honoria looked at her. "Whose grief, Lady Morvale? Mine or yours?" A faint colour rose beneath Cecily's powder. Tristan reached beside his plate and lifted the folded account she had produced at the music-hall. "This document was used to imply my wife mishandled charitable funds. The signature is false." Cecily gave a small laugh. "Surely you don't expect dinner guests to become handwriting experts?" "No, I expect them to listen." He placed a second sheet beside it. "This is a copied letter written by Her Grace on March 4th, warning me of missing receipts. This one is dated March 14th, the same day she was in Derbyshire distributing relief herself to the Audiobook widows. Lord Radbourne has confirmed his steward's presence in the district that week." Lord Radbourne cleared his throat. "I have. The roads were in a shocking state." Tristan placed another paper down. These letters did not reach me. Mrs. Ellery has given a written statement that household correspondence from Her Grace was diverted to the morning room under Lady Augusta's direction when Lady Morvale was present. Every eye turned toward Lady Augusta. The older woman went rigid. I merely wished to spare you unnecessary domestic agitation. You spared me my wife's voice, Tristan said, and you gave another woman access to it. Lady Augusta's lips parted. For once, nothing polished came out. Cecily leaned forward. This is unkind. Lady Augusta only tried to help a household strained by Her Grace's sensitivities. Honoria's voice entered gently. My sensitivities did not transfer money to Morvale estate obligations. Tristan laid the missing ledger page on the table. The movement was careful, almost reverent. This page was found in a glove box connected to Lady Morvale's household. It records money from the Alderwick Widows' Relief Fund diverted toward Morvale estate obligations. Mr. Harcourt is in the library with the originals and copies. Restitution will be required. Cecily's composure did not break all at once. It thinned, layer by layer. A page found in a glove box proves very little. Servants make mistakes, clerks misfile. Widows' funds pass through many hands. So do ornaments, Tristan said. He lifted a small silver tag. This tag belongs to the Marenford silver inventory key. It was missing from my wife's set. It appeared attached to your brooch at your musicale. Cecily's eyes flashed, the first true expression she had shown all night. I bought that brooch in Bond Street. Then the jeweller may tell Mr. Harcourt who sold him a tag marked for Marenford's private inventory. Lady Augusta stood. Enough. I will not sit here while a lady of rank is humiliated over household confusion. Honoria looked up at her. You sat here very comfortably when the humiliation was mine. Lady Augusta froze. The room heard it. More importantly, the room knew it was true. Honoria rose then, not because she needed height, but because some truths deserved to stand. I was told, often without words, that I should be grateful for a place another woman had been expected to fill. I was given keys, accounts, charities, letters, linens, silver, tempers, guests, widows, and silence. When those duties were performed well, they became invisible. When they could be turned against me, they became evidence of my unfitness. Her eyes moved from Lady Augusta to Cecily, then to the guests. I did not leave because I misunderstood kindness. I left because I finally understood contempt. No one spoke. Tristan's face changed at the word. Contempt. It had not been his intention, perhaps, but intention was a poor defense when injury had sat so long unattended. Cecily rose slowly. You are making yourself tragic, Duchess. No, Honoria said. I am making myself clear. Tristan turned to Lady Morvale. Marenford patronage is withdrawn from all Morvale charitable committees until the diverted funds are restored, Mr. Harcourt will send terms tomorrow. Your access to this house ends tonight. Any further circulation of forged letters or false accounts will be answered publicly and in writing, with evidence. Cecily's mouth trembled. Whether from rage or fear, no one could politely determine. You would ruin me? No, Tristan said. I am refusing to protect the ruin you arranged. Lady Augusta gripped the back of her chair. And what of me? Tristan faced his aunt. For the first time, there was grief in his severity. You will leave Marenford House tomorrow for the Dower House at Eversley. Your allowance will continue. Your authority here will not. You cannot exile your own blood. I can remove any person who used my name to silence my wife. Lady Augusta looked to the table for allies and found only lowered eyes. That was how society punished when proof became too solid to flatter. Slowly, quietly, with chairs not offered and invitations never sent. Cecily gathered her gloves with a hand that had lost its grace. "I hope you are satisfied, Your Grace," she said to Honoria. "Not yet," Honoria answered. Cecily stopped. Honoria looked at the ledger page. "The widows will be repaid first. Public apology does not feed a cottage." Lord Radbourne bowed his head slightly. "Well said." It was small, but the room felt it. The first witness had chosen truth aloud. Tristan reached into his coat and drew out the mistress's key ring. The candles caught on the small, polished shapes: writing desk, accounts cabinet, charity strongbox, silver book, linen reserve. Honoria had thought seeing them would hurt. It did. But not as before. Tristan stepped around the table and stopped at a proper distance. He held the ring with both hands, not as a man returning property, not as a duke restoring office, but as a husband offering back what he had finally learned to respect. "These were given to you as burden," he said. "I allowed them to become proof that you could be used without being seen. I offer them now with no demand attached." His voice lowered. "Not as chain, not as duty. Only if you choose this house again." Honoria looked at the keys, then at him. In his face she saw no expectation of easy mercy. That mattered. He was not asking the room to witness her forgiveness. He was asking it to witness his accountability. She took the key ring. The metal settled into her palm, cool and familiar, but the meaning had altered because she had. "I will not accept keys as burden," she said. "I will not accept apology as performance. And I will not accept marriage as silence." Tristan bowed his head. "No. If I return to any Marenford house, my voice returns first. Yes, if charity is done in my name, the widows are not ornaments for reputation." "Agreed. If I stand beside you, I do not stand behind a memory of Lady Morvale or under Lady Augusta's correction." His eyes held hers. "Never again." Honoria closed her fingers around the keys. Around the table, no one applauded. Applause would have been vulgar, and worse, simple. Instead, the guests sat in the heavy quiet of people who had seen a woman diminished and could no longer pretend the injury had been delicate. Lady Althea rose first and curtsied to Honoria. "Your Grace." Lord Radbourne followed. Then, one by one, the room acknowledged the Duchess, whose labour they had mistaken for air. Cecily left without farewell. Lady Augusta followed later, white with fury, escorted not by triumph, but by consequence. When the door closed behind them, the room did not feel healed. It felt honest. That was harder and better. Honoria turned to Tristan as the servants began to clear the untouched wine. "I will not remain in London tonight." "Where would you go?" "Alderwick Hall." He understood before she explained. Not flight this time. Foundation. The place where widows had been paid, where the false date could not survive, where the house might learn her name without candles and spectators. "Then we go to Alderwick," he said. Honoria looked at the keys resting in her palm. "Not as escape. No." Tristan's voice was quiet. As beginning, she did not answer with softness. Not yet. She simply closed her hand around the ring and walked from the dining room with her head high. While behind her, for the first time in years, Marenford House had nothing left to hide. Alderwick Hall did not welcome Honoria with splendour. It welcomed her with work honestly waiting to be done. That was why she trusted it more than London. 3 weeks after the dinner that had altered Marenford House, she stood in the morning room at Alderwick with grey Derbyshire light, spread across the papers on her desk, and listened to rain tapping the windows in a steady, practical rhythm. Beyond the glass, wet lawns rolled toward bare trees and stone outbuildings, and beyond them lay the cottages where the widows of the estate had received their envelopes on the march. Afternoon Cecily had tried to turn into proof of guilt. The house smelled of peat smoke, wool drying near kitchen fires, and beeswax rubbed into old furniture by hands that expected to be paid fairly for their care. It was not fashionable. It did not flatter. It remembered. Honoria had arrived there with Lady Beatrice Ellis, 2 trunks, and the mistress's key ring closed in her hand. Tristan had followed in a separate carriage by her request, not because she wished to punish him with distance, but because beginning again required room for truth to travel without being smothered by apology. He had accepted the arrangement without argument. That, too, had been a kind of arrival. In London, consequences had unfolded quietly, which made them no less real. Cecily, Countess of Morvale, had left town within 4 days, pleading the need to attend to estate matters no one believed had suddenly become urgent. Mr. Harcourt had secured written terms for restitution to the Alderwick Widows' Relief Fund, and Lord Radbourne had agreed to serve as witness to the repayment schedule. Lady Morvale's name vanished from 3 charitable committees with the swift politeness of society, correcting its own reflection. Lady Augusta Fenwick had been removed to the Dower House at Eversley, where her letters arrived twice weekly, each one full of injury, advice, and underlined references to family duty. Tristan answered the first himself. Honoria saw only the copy, because he brought it to her desk and asked whether any phrase presumed too much. It did not ask forgiveness for Lady Augusta. It did not ask Honoria to be generous. It simply stated that no person who had diverted the Duchess's correspondence would exercise authority in a Marenford household again. Honoria read it twice, then handed it back. "That will do," she said. Tristan had looked as though those 3 words were worth more than praise. Now, in the morning room, Mrs. Ellery placed a fresh packet of estate accounts on the desk and waited, not for Tristan's approval, but for Honoria's. The change had been small at first. A glance redirected, a question asked of the proper person. A servant saying "Your Grace," and meaning not rank alone, but authority restored. Small things could rebuild a life as surely as small things had once diminished it. "The timber receipts from the North Road are here," Mrs. Ellery said. "Mr. Harcourt's clerk has also sent the confirmation from Morvale's agent." Honoria opened the packet. The first repayment had been received, not enough to finish the matter, but enough to begin correcting it. "Send copies to Lord Radbourne and to Mrs. Bell at the cottages," she said. "The widows should know the fund has not been forgotten." Mrs. Ellery curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." At the doorway, Tristan stood with his hat in one hand and mud on his boots. Once, the sight would have seemed improper in a morning room. Now it seemed honest. He had been out with the steward since dawn, inspecting the boundary wall after a storm loosened stones near the lower pasture. He did not enter until Mrs. Ellery had gathered the papers she needed and left. Then he stopped just inside the room as if the threshold still deserved respect. "May I come in?" Honoria looked up. That question had become common between them. Not theatrical, not timid, necessary. Yes. He entered and placed a folded memorandum on the desk. "The West cottages need roof repairs before another month passes. I thought the cost might come from the maintenance reserve, but I wanted your view before I instructed Ames." Honoria took the memorandum. His handwriting was severe as ever, but the note had space in it now. Not conclusions handed down, questions. "The maintenance reserve can bear half," she said. "The rest should come from the rents held over after the autumn repairs." If we use the reserve alone, the steward will delay the dairy roof, and Mrs. Clark will spend another season catching rain in bowls. Tristan listened without interrupting. Then we will divide it. We? His eyes met hers. There was no defensiveness in them now, only carefulness. Yes, if you permit the word. Honoria looked back at the memorandum to hide the effect of that answer. I permit accuracy. In this case, it is accurate. A faint smile touched his mouth. It disappeared before it could become smug. He had learned that not every softened moment was a victory to claim. Mr. Harcourt writes that the second Morvale payment should arrive by quarter day. Good. He also says Lady Morvale objects to the wording of the committee notice. I imagine she does. He asked whether we would consider softening it. Honoria lifted one brow. Tristan placed another paper on the desk. I told him no. She read the short note. It was firm, restrained, and devastatingly clear. The funds had been restored under formal review. The committee acknowledged the Duchess of Marenford's continued patronage and regretted any confusion caused by unauthorized handling of accounts. No melodrama, no crow escape. That is well written, she said. It took me 9 drafts. I can tell. The first 8 must have been angrier. This time his smile stayed a little longer. The first one would have emptied a drawing room. Then I am sorry to have missed it. The room changed with their shared almost laughter. It did not become simple. Nothing between them was simple yet. But ease entered like a cautious guest and found a chair. Tristan looked toward the mantel, where the mistress's key ring lay beside the clock. Honoria had not worn it every day since returning. Sometimes she placed it on the desk, sometimes in her pocket, sometimes, deliberately, nowhere visible at all. No one asked. That had been part of the new law of the house. I have been thinking, Tristan said. Honoria sat back. A dangerous beginning. Very. You should prepare yourself. The dryness in his tone startled another small smile from her. Then he grew serious. I do not wish to ask you to resume our marriage as if the interruption was a quarrel and not a consequence. Honoria's fingers stilled on the paper. What do you wish? He looked uncertain, and the uncertainty was more intimate than any confidence he had ever shown her. To court my wife, if she will allow it. The words moved through the room slowly. Outside, rain tapped the windows. Somewhere below stairs, a door closed, and life continued with blessed indifference. Honoria looked at the man across from her. He was still Duke of Marenford, still proud, still capable of command. But the man who had once expected silence to confirm order now stood waiting for an answer he could not force. Courtship usually begins before marriage, she said. Ours did many things in the wrong order. And what would courtship mean to you? He did not answer with flowers. That would have disappointed her. It would mean I ask before assuming. It would mean I call on you in rooms where you may refuse me. It would mean I learn what you enjoy when duty is not standing beside you with a list. It would mean I do not make gratitude a substitute for love. Her throat tightened. She looked down before tenderness could make her careless. And if I do not yet know whether love can grow where resentment has lived, then I wait outside that room until invited. Silence followed, not the old silence, not the one that had swallowed letters and carried insults. This one had breath in it. Honoria rose and went to the mantel. The key ring rested beneath her hand, cool and familiar. She lifted it and felt its weight without flinching. Then she removed the smallest key from the ring, the brass key, to her writing desk. Tristan watched her, but did not move. She crossed back to him and placed the little key in his palm. His fingers did not close around it at once. "Honoria," he said, and the word was half question, half warning against giving too much. "This does not mean the desk is yours," she said. "No. It does not mean my thoughts are yours to enter without permission. Never. It means that when I choose to open something, I may ask you to stand beside me and read honestly." He closed his hand around the key then, slowly, as though accept a vow rather than a gift. "I will earn the right to be asked." Honoria believed he meant it. More importantly, she believed he now understood that meaning it was only the beginning. She returned the remaining keys to the ring and hung it on the small brass hook beside her desk, not at her waist, not hidden in a drawer, but where it belonged when a house no longer confused labor with chains. The sound it made was light. Once, in Marenford House, that sound had been an ending. At Alderwick Hall, under the steady rain and the watchful quiet of rooms, learning a new language, it sounded like a door opening from both sides.